The heavy oak doors of the Fulton County Courthouse slammed shut behind me, echoing with a resonant, satisfying finality that vibrated through the soles of my designer heels. Inside those walls, a judge had just brought his wooden gavel down officially and legally dissolving my 7-year marriage to Derrick. I paused at the top of the landing, taking a slow, deliberate breath of the humid, sun-baked Atlanta air, savoring the crisp, intoxicating taste of absolute freedom. But before I could even begin my descent down the grand, sweeping concrete steps to my waiting car, my path was aggressively barricaded. Evelyn, my now former mother-in-law, stood planted at the bottom of the stairs like a furious, tweed-clad gargoyle guarding the pristine gates of high society. She was flanked tightly by the rest of her parasitic brood, my ex-husband Derrick, his spoiled younger sister Jasmine, and Jasmine's pretentiously smug white husband Trent. Evelyn gripped the handles of her designer handbag so tightly her knuckles were stark white, her face twisted into a mask of pure unadulterated malice. To this status-obsessed matriarch, I was nothing but Kendra, the pathetic charity case. I was the unassuming freelance consultant that her golden child son had taken pity on. For nearly a decade, they had controlled the narrative, viewing me as an uncultured outsider who lacked the pedigree to sit at their country club tables. They didn't know that my quiet demeanor hid a ruthless, high-level private equity mergers and acquisitions specialist. They didn't know I orchestrated multi-million-dollar corporate liquidations for breakfast. To them, I was a mouse. They had no idea they had been living with a viper. Well, the dead weight has finally been cut loose. Evelyn sneered, her voice carrying loudly across the busy courtyard. Lawyers and pedestrians in tailored suits turned their heads, sensing the unfolding drama, but Evelyn didn't care. She thrived on an audience. She took a menacing step up the concrete stairs, her eyes narrowing with toxic rage. Right after our divorce hearing concluded, I need to make one thing perfectly clear to you, Kendra. Evelyn screamed, her face flushed with venom, completely abandoning her polished socialite persona. Don't ever set foot in my house again. Get out. You are entirely stripped of our family name now. You have no money, no status, and absolutely no future in this city. Take your pathetic, cheap little suitcases and crawl back to whatever ghetto you dragged yourself out of. You are nothing without my son. Do you hear me? Absolutely nothing. Derrick stood right beside her, practically glowing with unearned arrogance. He adjusted the cuffs of his bespoke suit, a suit I had secretly paid for to maintain his fraudulent image as a tech health CEO in Atlanta's elite African-American social scene. He offered me a look of profound, sickening pity. It is truly tragic, Kendra, Derrick said, offering a heavy, dramatic sigh meant for the spectators. I tried to give you a beautiful life. I gave you a front-row seat to wealth, to galas, to a powerful family legacy. But you were always just too small-minded and uneducated to appreciate it. Now you are leaving this courthouse with nothing but the clothes on your back. I hope the reality of your new poverty stings. Trent, the brother-in-law who lived entirely off Derrick's corporate credit cards while projecting an aura of supreme superiority, laughed loudly. He leaned casually against the stone handrail, looking me up and down with utter disdain. Let us be generous, Derrick. Trent mocked, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. I hear they are looking for cheap labor at the country club. Maybe she can go back to scrubbing floors and washing dishes to pay off those student loans she's always crying about. Jasmine giggled, linking her arm tightly through Trent's, staring at me as if I were a piece of rotting garbage that had blown onto their pristine driveway. For 7 long years, I would have lowered my gaze. I would have swallowed the bile rising in my throat, apologized for my mere existence, and played the role of the grateful, intimidated peasant. But today, standing under the glaring Georgia sun, the script had officially flipped. I didn't shed a single tear. I didn't shrink back. I didn't tremble. Instead, I calmly reached into my sleek leather tote bag, pulled out my oversized dark sunglasses, and slid them onto my face with agonizing, deliberate slowness. I looked down at Evelyn, letting a bright, genuine, and utterly chilling smile spread across my face. I don't plan to wash dishes, Trent, I said, my voice perfectly steady, cutting through the humid air like a scalpel. And I certainly won't be returning to any ghetto, Evelyn. Mainly because I have no need to ever set foot on your property again. I paused, letting the silence stretch for a fraction of a second. Actually, I already sold your prized Buckhead estate this morning. The foreclosure was executed the exact second the judge signed my divorce papers. Derrick's smug smile faltered, but he quickly rolled his eyes. What kind of delusional nonsense are you spouting now? He demanded. I ignored his pathetic attempt at denial and shifted my gaze directly to him. Oh, and Derrick, I added, keeping my tone cheerfully polite. You should probably check your corporate email. I just fired you from your position as CEO. For a brief, suspended moment, the entire family stared at me in complete stunned silence. The sheer weight of my words hung heavily over the courthouse steps. Then, as if perfectly choreographed, Evelyn, Derrick, Jasmine, and Trent erupted into hysterical, mocking laughter. They clutched their stomachs, pointing at me, entirely convinced that the trauma of the divorce had finally broken my mind. They genuinely believed I was experiencing a pathetic, desperate, psychotic break right there in public. Their cruel, arrogant amusement echoed loudly across the pavement, completely blind to the fact that their financial execution had already begun. It was exactly the reaction I wanted. It was the perfect opening for my next move. The collective laughter of the family began to taper off, replacing their momentary shock with a deep-seated, condescending amusement. Trent, always eager to assert his unearned dominance and play the role of the refined white savior among his wealthy black in-laws, wiped a fake tear of mirth from his eye. He detached himself from Jasmine's grip and took 2 aggressive steps up the concrete stairs, puffing out his chest inside his tailored linen suit. He wanted to tower over me, to physically intimidate the woman he viewed as utterly beneath him. Trent possessed a specific brand of arrogance, the kind fueled entirely by his proximity to Derrick's wealth, masked behind a veneer of country club sophistication. You really have lost your damn mind, Kendra. Trent sneered, his voice loud enough to draw the attention of a passing group of paralegals. He shook his head, looking at me with a mixture of pity and disgust. Selling the Buckhead estate, firing Derrick. You need serious psychiatric help. I always told Evelyn that bringing someone from your background into this family was a massive liability. You can dress a girl in Chanel, you can teach her which fork to use at a gala. But you just can't wash off that Section 8 mentality, can you? I remained perfectly still, letting him dig his own grave. I remember exactly what you were when Derrick scraped you off the bottom of the barrel. Trent continued, his racially coded classist microaggressions flowing effortlessly. You were working 2 miserable jobs, what was it, a barista by day and a data entry clerk by night, just drowning in student loan debt from some second-rate state college. You were a charity case. You hit the absolute jackpot with Derrick. You got a free ride on a luxury express train, and now that your ticket has finally expired, you're throwing a ghetto temper tantrum on the courthouse steps because you realize you actually have to work for a living again. He reached into the breast pocket of his expensive jacket, a jacket bought with a corporate card, and pulled out his sleek smartphone. He tapped the screen, holding it up like a weapon. I am calling courthouse security right now, Trent announced, his thumb hovering over the keypad. I am going to tell them a deranged, aggressive vagrant is harassing my family. They know exactly how to deal with trash like you. Let's see how much you smile when you're sitting in the back of a squad car, Kendra. I would put that phone away if I were you, Trent, I said. My voice didn't rise in volume, but it dropped to a dangerous, icy whisper that immediately froze the smug smirk on his face. Unless, of course, you want me to tell your fiercely loyal wife exactly how you've been spending your Tuesday afternoons. Jasmine immediately stopped laughing. She glared at me, her hands planting firmly on her hips, the massive diamond on her finger catching the sunlight. Don't you dare speak to my husband like that, Jasmine snapped, stepping up to stand beside him. Trent brings actual value to this family. You are just trying to deflect because you know he is entirely right about you. I turned my gaze entirely to my former sister-in-law, lowering my sunglasses slightly to look her dead in the eyes. Value, is that what you call it, Jasmine? Because I call it grand larceny. Without breaking eye contact with Trent, I opened my mouth and let the digits fall from my lips with lethal precision. 302884191, I recited smoothly, letting the numbers hang heavily in the humid air, followed by account number 449022278. Trent's face went completely startlingly pale. The blood drained from his cheeks so fast he looked physically ill. The arrogant white savior complex vanished instantly, replaced by sheer, unadulterated panic. His hand began to shake violently, and he slowly lowered his smartphone to his side. "What are those numbers?" Derrick demanded, his brow furrowing as he looked between me and his brother-in-law. Kendra stopped speaking in riddles. "What the hell are you talking about?" "Those, Derrick, are the exact routing and account numbers for the primary operating fund of your health technology startup," I explained brightly, finally shifting my gaze to my ex-husband. "The same operating fund that I have been privately monitoring for the past 5 years. And it seems your brilliant, valuable brother-in-law has been using a ghost vendor account to funnel massive amounts of your company money into a private, offshore checking account registered under the name Trenton Enterprises." Evelyn gasped loudly, clutching the pearls at her neck. "That is an outrageous lie. Trent is the vice president of regional sales. He would never steal from us. He manages our investments." "He is not stealing to invest, Evelyn," I corrected her, smiling as I watched a heavy bead of sweat roll down Trent's temple. "He is stealing to fund his secret life in Miami, Florida, specifically a luxury penthouse apartment on Brickell Avenue. Rent is $8,000 a month, paid directly from Derrick's corporate account." "Miami," Jasmine repeated, her voice cracking. She turned slowly to Trent, her eyes wide with sudden terrifying suspicion. "You told me your monthly trips to Miami were for regional sales conferences. Trent, what is she talking about?" "She's lying," Trent shouted, his voice pitching an octave higher than usual. He backed away from his wife. "She's just trying to tear us apart because she's bitter. Don't listen to her, Jasmine. She hacked the company. She's a criminal." "I don't need to hack a company that I legally control," I replied calmly. "And I certainly don't need to lie about Chloe." The moment that name left my lips, Trent stumbled backward as if I had shot him in the chest. "Who the hell is Chloe?" Jasmine shrieked, grabbing Trent by the lapels of his linen suit. "Chloe is a 21-year-old Instagram fitness model." I answered, my tone helpful and precise. "She enjoys high-end shopping sprees at Bal Harbour, exclusive spa days, and fine dining. Trent has been paying for every single bit of it using your family's corporate credit card. I have the bank statements, the wire transfers, and the signed lease agreement for the penthouse. He calls her his little sugar baby in the payment memos." Jasmine let out a sound that was half scream and half sob. She shoved Trent incredibly hard, sending him crashing back against the stone railing of the courthouse steps. "You miserable, cheating parasite!" she roared, slapping him across the face with the back of her hand. The sharp, violent crack echoed through the courtyard, drawing the immediate attention of wealthy lawyers and prestigious pedestrians walking nearby. "I brought you into this family. I gave you everything. You were nothing before me. You were living in a studio apartment." Trent held his reddened cheek, looking frantically at Derrick for backup. "Derrick, you have to believe me. I was going to pay the money back. It was just a temporary loan. I swear it." "A loan to pay for a mistress!" Derrick yelled, his own pristine image cracking as his anger boiled over. "You stole from my company. Do you have any idea what kind of financial trouble we are already in? You just handed this crazy woman the exact ammunition she needs to ruin us." The supposedly elite, untouchable family was now brawling loudly like common street criminals on the stone steps of the busy county courthouse. Jasmine lunged at Trent again, her manicured nails tearing at his shirt, while Trent threw his arms up to protect his face. The pristine public image Evelyn had spent decades curating was rapidly disintegrating before her very eyes, and I hadn't even dropped the heaviest bombs yet. The violent scuffle between Jasmine and Trent was a spectacle that Evelyn's fragile, status-obsessed nervous system simply could not tolerate. The matriarch had spent 30 years carefully cultivating an image of absolute, untouchable perfection in Atlanta's high society, and now her daughter and son-in-law were tearing at each other's designer clothes like feral animals on the steps of the Fulton County Courthouse. Passers-by were actually stopping, some discreetly pulling out their phones to record the elite family's spectacular implosion. Stop it! Stop it right this instant! Evelyn shrieked, her carefully styled hair falling wildly around her face. She shoved herself forcefully between Jasmine and Trent, using her heavy, oversized designer handbag as a physical shield to push her daughter backward. We are making a massive scene in public. We have a flawless reputation to maintain in this city. We will handle Trent privately. Get a hold of yourself, Jasmine. Jasmine was hyperventilating, mascara running down her cheeks in thick, dark streaks, but she allowed her mother to push her back. Trent adjusted his torn collar, looking thoroughly humiliated as he cowardly ducked behind Evelyn's shoulder. Realizing that the social damage was already bleeding out of control, Evelyn turned her burning, unhinged fury back toward the person she blamed for exposing the rot in her perfect family. She marched directly toward me, her chest heaving, her eyes wide with desperate rage. She reached a trembling hand into her leather tote and aggressively ripped out a thick, folded stack of legal papers. She practically shoved them into my face, the heavy parchment crinkling loudly in the humid air. "You think you are so incredibly smart, don't you, Kendra?" Evelyn spat out, pointing a jagged manicured fingernail at the documents. "You think you can just stand there and weave these psychotic lies about selling my property to distract us? This is the original deed to the Buckhead estate. This mansion has been in my family for 4 generations. It is a protected historical legacy completely locked away in an ironclad family trust. My name is the only name on this title. You have absolutely zero legal authority to sell a single blade of grass on my property, let alone the entire estate. You are a fraud, Kendra. A pathetic, bitter, delusional fraud trying to scare us because you know you are leaving this family with nothing." I didn't flinch. I didn't back away from the heavy parchment waving inches from my nose. Instead, I slowly reached into my own sleek briefcase and retrieved a pristine black manila folder. I unfastened the string tie with deliberate, agonizing slowness, letting the suspense hang thickly over the courthouse steps. Derrick, who had been busy brushing the dirt off his trousers after breaking up his sister's fight, suddenly froze. His eyes locked onto the black folder, and all the remaining color rapidly drained from his face. He knew exactly what that specific folder looked like. He had seen it on my home office desk a dozen times, but I had always told him it was just boring freelance consulting paperwork. "You are absolutely right about one thing, Evelyn," I said, projecting my voice so every single wealthy bystander, lawyer, and paralegal could hear the devastating truth. "That deed did have only your name on it, and it was heavily protected by a family trust. But trusts and deeds require signatures to be modified or leveraged. Tell me, Evelyn, did you sign a comprehensive commercial mortgage agreement exactly 3 years ago on the 14th of October? Evelyn frowned, visibly confused by the sudden, highly specific shift in the conversation. The fiery rage in her eyes flickered into uncertainty. "Of course I didn't sign a mortgage agreement," she scoffed indignantly, clutching her deed tighter to her chest. "Our home has been completely paid off since the late 90s. We don't need mortgages. We are wealthy." "That is fascinating," I replied smoothly, pulling a heavily redacted banking ledger and a copy of a loan contract from the black folder. I held it up right next to her face. "Because according to these authenticated financial records, your signature is plastered all over a binding commercial loan contract. A contract that successfully leveraged your entire Buckhead estate for a lump sum of $3.5 million. Evelyn gasped, snatching the paper from my hands. She stared at the signature line, her eyes darting frantically across the page. Her breathing became shallow and rapid. This is a forgery," she whispered, her voice trembling with genuine foundational shock. "This is not my handwriting. Someone forged my name." I turned my gaze slowly, lethally toward Derrick. "Why don't you ask your brilliant, successful CEO of a son whose handwriting that actually is?" All eyes turned to Derrick. Evelyn stared at her golden child, the son who could do no wrong, waiting for him to vehemently deny the accusation. But Derrick took a stumbling step backward, shaking his head in a pathetic attempt to escape the invisible walls closing in on him. "I had to do it, Mother." Derrick stammered, his voice cracking under the intense pressure of the public exposure. "The health tech company was completely bleeding cash. We were missing payroll. And then I got a tip on some aggressive day trading options. It was supposed to be a sure thing. I was going to flip the money, save the company, and pay the mortgage off before you ever found out. The market just turned against me. It wasn't my fault. You forged your own mother's signature to feed a catastrophic gambling addiction disguised as day trading. I clarified loudly, making sure the reality of his crime was perfectly understood by the audience. You took out a high-interest predatory loan from an anonymous private equity firm called Apex Holdings. You promised them the Buckhead estate as direct collateral because you were too cowardly to admit that your grand business ventures were massive, spectacular failures. Jasmine let out another horrified scream, burying her face in her hands. Even Trent temporarily stopped whining about his scratched face to stare at his brother-in-law in absolute disbelief. Evelyn looked like she was about to hyperventilate. She clutched the forged document and the original deed to her chest, tears finally streaming down her perfectly contoured face. Apex Holdings, she repeated weakly, the name tasting like ash in her mouth. They are going to take my home. They are going to take everything because of you, Derrick. We have to call them. We have to negotiate a repayment plan. We can sell the cars. We can liquidate the company assets. I let out a soft, genuine laugh. It was a cold, calculating sound that immediately silenced their panicked brainstorming. There is absolutely no negotiating with Apex Holdings, Evelyn. I said, my tone shifting from polite to absolute zero. And you don't need to call them. I leaned forward, stepping into her personal space, staring directly into her terrified, tear-filled eyes. You don't need to call them because you are already looking directly at the majority owner of Apex Holdings. I revealed, watching her face go completely slack with absolute dread. I own the private equity firm that bought your son's toxic debt. I own the mortgage on your precious family legacy. The foreclosure was finalized the exact moment the judge stamped my divorce decree 20 minutes ago. You have 30 days to vacate the premises before the marshals throw your Louis Vuitton bags onto the street. You are officially homeless. The silence that fell over the courthouse steps was absolute, broken only by the distant hum of downtown traffic. Evelyn's knees buckled slightly, the prized deed slipping from her fingers and fluttering to the dirty concrete like a dead leaf. The fortress she had spent her entire life defending had just been legally, systematically annihilated by the very woman she had spent 7 years calling a charity case. Derrick stared at the foreclosed deed lying on the dirty concrete. His breathing was ragged, his chest heaving under the expensive fabric of his bespoke suit. For a man who had spent his entire adult life riding the coattails of his family's generational wealth and posing as a self-made titan of Atlanta's tech industry, the public revelation of his financial ineptitude was a fate worse than death. The whispers of the surrounding crowd, the lawyers, the paralegals, the courthouse staff who had stopped to watch the spectacle, were like physical blows to his fragile, inflated ego. He couldn't accept it. His narcissistic mind simply refused to process the reality that Kendra, the quiet, unassuming woman he had treated like a glorified accessory, had systematically outmaneuvered him. You are out of your damn mind! Derrick suddenly barked, a harsh, desperate sound that cracked in the humid air. He stepped in front of his weeping mother, attempting to physically block Evelyn from the devastating truth of my words. He puffed out his chest desperately, trying to project the aura of the powerful, untouchable chief executive officer he pretended to be. You think you've won, Kendra? You think taking a single piece of real estate is going to break me? Derrick raised his voice aggressively, playing to the gallery of onlookers trying to twist the narrative back in his favor. He adjusted his silk tie with shaking fingers, his eyes wild with a volatile mixture of fury and absolute denial. I am the CEO of a $40 million health tech enterprise, Derrick screamed, his voice echoing off the stone pillars of the courthouse. I generate more revenue in a single fiscal quarter than your pathetic little private equity firm could comprehend in a lifetime. You are nothing but a minor inconvenience to my empire. So what if you bought some toxic debt? I will simply buy my mother a larger, more expensive estate in Tuxedo Park by the end of the month. I will stroke a massive check and make this entire situation disappear just like I always do. Evelyn, desperate for any lifeline, grabbed the back of Derrick's suit jacket, her tear-stained face peeking out from behind his shoulder. Yes, she whimpered, clinging to her son's frantic delusions. Derrick will fix this. He always fixes everything. You can't destroy our family. Oh, I am going to destroy you, Kendra, Derrick roared, emboldened by his mother's blind faith. He pointed a manicured finger directly at my face, a vein bulging visibly in his forehead. I am going to bury you in so many defamation and extortion lawsuits that you will be begging for mercy. I have the best corporate lawyers in the state of Georgia on retainer. I will tie up your assets, I will drag your name through the mud, and I will make sure you spend the rest of your miserable life working minimum wage jobs to pay off the legal fees. You messed with the wrong man. I didn't blink. I didn't raise my voice to match his frantic, unhinged screaming. His empty threats washed over me like a warm, insignificant breeze. For 7 years, I had listened to this exact same bluster, this hollow posturing of a man who was entirely empty inside. But today, his words held absolutely no power. Are you quite finished, Derrick? I asked softly, my calm tone slicing through his hysterical rant with surgical precision. Instead of arguing, I calmly reached back into my sleek leather tote bag. The crowd fell completely silent, holding their collective breath, intuitively sensing that the final nail was about to be hammered into the coffin of Derrick's pristine public image. With agonizing, deliberate slowness, I retrieved a pristine silver iPad Pro. I tapped the glass screen twice, bringing the device to life. The bright display illuminated my face as I adjusted the volume rocker on the side, pushing the audio output to its absolute maximum capacity. You keep talking about your empire, Derrick, I said, my voice echoing clearly across the sun-baked concrete, ensuring every single spectator heard me. You keep hiding behind this illusion that you are a visionary leader, a titan of industry holding up your family's legacy. But you don't have an empire. You have a fragile, rotting house of cards built on lies, other people's money, and your own staggering incompetence, and I am the one who just pulled out the bottom row. I tapped the green video call icon on the screen. The tablet chimed loudly, a crisp, digital ringing sound that seemed to paralyze Derrick. He stared at the device, a sudden, inexplicable dread washing over his features. He didn't know who I was calling, but the sheer confidence radiating from my posture told him it was going to be catastrophic. Within seconds, the encrypted call connected. The screen split into a high-definition wide-angle video feed. I turned the iPad around so Derrick, his mother Jasmine, and the entire gathering crowd could clearly see the crisp display. Staring back at us from the screen were 7 stern-looking men and women in immaculate tailored business wear. They were sitting around a massive polished mahogany table in the primary executive conference room of Derrick's own corporate headquarters. It was the entire board of directors for his health technology startup. Derrick's jaw dropped completely open. The remaining bluster evaporated from his body in an instant, leaving him looking like a terrified, cornered child. His eyes darted frantically across the faces of his primary investors, the venture capitalists, and the medical advisors who held his entire professional life in their hands. The men and women on the screen looked back at him with expressions of profound, unfiltered disgust. Derrick! A deep, authoritative voice boomed from the iPad's premium speakers, carrying effortlessly across the courthouse steps. It was Harrison Sterling, the ruthless and notoriously unforgiving chairman of the board. He was glaring directly into the camera lens, his hands folded neatly on the mahogany table. I see you are currently occupied outside the courthouse. I will make this extremely brief. The board of directors has just concluded an emergency executive session. Derrick swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously. Heavy drops of sweat began to bead on his forehead, ruining his perfectly groomed appearance. Harrison, what is going on? Derrick stammered, his hands trembling as he instinctively reached toward the screen only to pull back. You can't hold an executive session without notifying me. I am the chief executive officer. That is a direct violation of our corporate bylaws. I demand to know who authorized this meeting. The chairman did not flinch at Derrick's desperate demands. He simply stared through the digital lens, ready to deliver the execution. You lost the protection of our corporate bylaws the absolute moment you decided to commit federal wire fraud and gross medical negligence, Derrick. Chairman Harrison Sterling replied, his voice chillingly, devoid of any professional courtesy. The other board members on the screen sat in stone-faced silence, staring at my ex-husband as if he were a diseased specimen in a petri dish. 10 minutes ago, while you were busy finalizing your divorce, the board received a massive, heavily encrypted data dump directly from our primary anonymous angel investor. The exact same angel investor who has single-handedly kept this failing, mismanaged company financially solvent for the past 5 years. Derrick swallowed hard, heavy, glistening drops of sweat, visibly sliding down his temples and staining the pristine collar of his custom shirt. His mind scrambled to make sense of the sudden ambush. The anonymous investor, Derrick stammered, his eyes darting frantically. They never communicate directly with the board, they only communicate through encrypted proxies. Who sent you that data? This is a setup. This is a coordinated attack by a rival firm. I took a deliberate, measured step forward, moving into the iPad's camera frame so the lens perfectly captured my calm face right next to Derrick's horrified, sweating profile. I sent the data, Derrick, I said brightly, offering a cheerful, polite wave to the camera. Good afternoon, Harrison. Thank you and the rest of the board for assembling on such incredibly short notice. Thank you for bringing this catastrophic liability to our immediate attention, Kendra. The chairman replied respectfully, offering me a solemn nod through the digital display. Your financial backing has been invaluable to our operations since Series A funding, and we deeply apologize for the reckless criminal actions of our soon-to-be former executive. Evelyn let out a strangled, breathless noise, clutching her chest as if she were having a sudden, massive coronary event. You... Evelyn gasped, pointing a trembling, manicured finger at me, while her other hand gripped Derrick's arm for physical support. You are the anonymous angel investor. You have been funding his company this entire time. With what money? You are just a pathetic freelance consultant. You are a charity case. You don't have millions of dollars. I am a senior acquisitions specialist for one of the most ruthless private equity firms on the East Coast. Evelyn. I corrected her firmly, my tone leaving absolutely no room for debate or interruption. I let Derrick play the role of the strong, wealthy CEO because his fragile, deeply insecure male ego could not handle the fact that his wife made 10 times his annual salary. I have been quietly covering the payroll for his entire staff out of my own pocket since this pathetic startup launched. Every gala you attended, every country club due, you paid every designer suit your son wore, it was all financed by the ghetto girl you despised. I turned my attention back to my ex-husband, whose breathing had escalated into a rapid, shallow hyperventilation. The crowd on the courthouse steps had swelled the spectators, pressing in closer to witness the spectacular corporate execution happening on the sidewalk. The data dump I provided to the board contained irrefutable time-stamped proof of your criminal activities, Derrick. I continued, my voice cutting through the humid air with lethal precision. I didn't just give them your financial ledgers, I gave them the unedited raw clinical trial data for your new cardiovascular medical device. The exact same clinical data that you deliberately altered, manipulated, and falsified before submitting it to the Food and Drug Administration for federal approval. Derrick let out a high-pitched, terrified sound, stepping backward as if I had physically struck him. You actively endangered human lives, I stated coldly, looking him dead in the eyes. You hid the adverse patient reactions. You threatened your chief medical officer with termination if she didn't manipulate the testing numbers to look favorable. You were willing to put a defective, dangerous medical device into the chests of innocent patients just to secure your next round of venture capital funding. You are not a visionary leader, Derrick. You are a dangerous, desperate, absolute fraud. Kendra, please! Derrick begged, his voice cracking into a pathetic, high-pitched whine that completely shattered his carefully crafted alpha male persona. He reached out with shaking hands, desperately trying to grab the iPad from my grasp. You can't do this to me. I built this company from the ground up. It is my entire life. If you expose the clinical trial data to the FDA, the federal government will shut us down completely. The investors will pull out. I will go to prison. I will be ruined. We can fix this quietly, please. You are already ruined, I stated smoothly, feeling absolutely no sympathy for the man who had spent 7 years treating me like a worthless, disposable accessory. I looked back at the screen. The board of directors has a strict fiduciary and moral duty to protect the shareholders and the public. Isn't that right, Harrison? That is absolutely correct, Kendra. The chairman agreed through the tablet speakers, his expression hardening into pure granite. Derrick listened to me very carefully. Effective immediately, you are terminated from your position as Chief Executive Officer for extreme cause. Because you have committed documented intentional fraud against federal regulators, the morality and criminal clauses in your executive contract have been officially triggered. Derrick shook his head wildly, tears welling in his bloodshot eyes. No, 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 you can't. You are stripped of all company equity. The chairman continued mercilessly, his voice booming over the courthouse steps. You are stripped of all stock options, your pension, and all severance payouts. You leave this company with absolutely zero compensation. Furthermore, our corporate legal department is currently preparing to hand your falsified FDA documents over to the federal authorities to protect the firm from your liability. Do not ever contact anyone at this corporation again. You are done. The encrypted video call abruptly disconnected, the screen flashing to black. The heavy, suffocating silence that followed hung over the sunlit concrete like a physical weight. The elite crowd of lawyers and spectators watched in pure, silent fascination. Derrick stared at his distorted reflection in the dark glass of the iPad. The reality of his absolute total destruction finally breached the walls of his narcissism. His company was gone. His wealth was completely erased. His reputation was permanently destroyed. Derrick's legs simply gave out beneath him. The tailored fabric of his expensive trousers tore against the rough pavement as he collapsed heavily to his knees on the courthouse steps. He buried his face in his trembling hands, a guttural, agonizing sob tearing from his throat. The untouchable golden child CEO was now a weeping, broken shell of a man, kneeling in the dirt before the woman he had so foolishly underestimated. And I wasn't even close to being finished with them. Derrick remained on his knees, his face buried in his hands, as agonizing, breathless sobs racked his tailored frame. The absolute collapse of the family's golden child was a stunning, pathetic spectacle. Evelyn stood frozen a few feet away, her mouth slightly agape, her eyes glazed over as her mind violently rejected the reality of her son's utter ruin. The gathered crowd of lawyers, courthouse clerks, and affluent pedestrians watched in stunned fascination, captivated by the sheer, unadulterated destruction of Atlanta's most pretentious family. For a moment, the only sound on the sun-baked concrete was Derrick's pathetic weeping. But then a new noise began to cut through the heavy, humid air. It started as a distant, high-pitched wail echoing off the towering glass and steel skyscrapers of downtown Atlanta. Within seconds, the sound amplified into a deafening, aggressive scream. The flashing red and blue lights of 2 Atlanta Police Department cruisers violently rounded the corner, their sirens blaring as they aggressively jumped the curb and parked diagonally across the restricted plaza at the bottom of the courthouse steps. Trent, who was still holding his reddened cheek where Jasmine had slapped him, suddenly straightened up. The sheer panic that had gripped him mere moments ago when I exposed his Miami sugar baby suddenly vanished, replaced by a massive, misguided surge of his trademark white savior arrogance. He looked at the flashing lights, then looked back at me, a cruel, triumphant smirk spreading across his face. Trent genuinely believed the cavalry had arrived. He assumed the courthouse security or a concerned bystander had called the police to deal with the deranged, hostile woman harassing a wealthy family. "Well, look what you've done now, Kendra," Trent sneered, puffing his chest out inside his torn linen suit. He adjusted his posture desperately, trying to reclaim his false sense of superiority. He pointed a finger at me, shaking his head with mock pity. "You pushed it too far. You caused a massive public disturbance. You're throwing around forged documents, and now the police are here to throw your ghetto trash ass in a holding cell. I hope you look good in an orange jumpsuit." 4 police officers in heavy tactical vests stepped out of the cruisers. They moved with coordinated, urgent precision, their hands resting on their utility belts as they quickly ascended the grand concrete steps. Trent immediately stepped forward to intercept them, slipping effortlessly into his role as the concerned law-abiding citizen. "Officers right here," Trent called out, waving his hand to flag them down. He pointed a perfectly manicured finger directly at my chest. "This woman is aggressively harassing my family. She is causing a massive public disturbance, forging legal documents, and attempting to extort my brother-in-law. I need you to arrest her and remove her from the premises immediately." The lead officer, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a stern expression, didn't even break his stride. He didn't look at me. He didn't ask for my identification. He walked straight past Derrick's sobbing form on the ground, stepped smoothly around Evelyn, and marched directly into Trent's personal space. "Trenton Harrington," the lead officer asked, his voice a deep authoritative bark that echoed over the sirens. Trent blinked slightly, taken aback that the officer knew his full name, but his arrogant smirk remained. "Yes, that's me," Trent replied, standing tall. "I can give you a full statement on her behavior once you put her in handcuffs. Trenton Harrington, you are under arrest for multiple counts of felony embezzlement, grand larceny, and federal wire fraud." The officer interrupted, his voice devoid of any emotion. Before Trent could even process the words, the officer aggressively grabbed his right wrist, spinning the pretentious brother-in-law around so fast his expensive loafers skidded on the concrete. The officer slammed Trent face first against the heavy stone banister of the courthouse steps. The sickening thud of his chest hitting the granite knocked the wind completely out of him. Click, clack. The cold, unforgiving steel of heavy police handcuffs locked securely tightly around Trent's wrists, pinning his arms behind his back. "What? No, wait!" Trent shrieked, his voice pitching into a hysterical, breathless squeal. He thrashed wildly against the stone, his cheek pressed painfully into the hot granite. "This is a massive mistake. You're arresting the wrong person. Arrest her. She's the criminal. She hacked our company. I didn't do anything wrong." I took a slow, deliberate step toward the struggling man, ensuring I was standing perfectly in his limited line of sight. I lowered my sunglasses, offering him a smile colder than liquid nitrogen. "The Atlanta Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit doesn't make mistakes, Trent," I said, my voice smooth and conversational, effortlessly cutting through his panicked screaming. "I made sure of that. At exactly 8 o'clock this morning, while you were drinking mimosas and preparing to mock my poverty, I forwarded a highly indexed, heavily encrypted digital package directly to the district attorney's office." Trent's eyes widened in absolute unadulterated horror as he stared at me from the stone banister. "I gave them everything, Trent," I explained happily, ticking the items off on my fingers. "I gave them the ghost vendor accounts you created. I gave them the fake invoices you submitted for the regional sales conferences. I gave them the IP addresses you used to transfer the corporate funds. And most importantly, I gave them the itemized credit card receipts for your little fitness model Chloe in Miami. The jewelry, the penthouse lease, the spa days. All paid for with stolen corporate funds across state lines. That makes it a federal wire fraud case. You are looking at a minimum of 15 to 20 years in a federal penitentiary." "No, no." Trent sobbed, his arrogant facade completely shattered. The officers forcefully yanked him off the banister, hauling him backward down the stairs toward the waiting cruisers. He dug the heels of his loafers into the concrete, desperately fighting the inevitable. He looked wildly at Derrick, but Derrick was completely paralyzed by his own corporate destruction, weeping on the ground. He looked at Evelyn, but the matriarch was staring blankly into the distance, her mind shattered. Finally, Trent locked eyes with his wife. "Jasmine!" Trent screamed, tears and snot running down his face. He looked absolutely pathetic, a far cry from the smug, wealthy elite he pretended to be. "Jasmine, baby, please. You have to help me. Call our lawyers, pay my bail. Please, don't let them take me. I'll explain everything about Chloe. I swear it meant nothing. I love you. Just pay the bail." Jasmine stood at the top of the stairs, her mascara running in thick, dark rivers down her cheeks. She looked down at the man she had proudly paraded around her country club for the past 4 years. She didn't see a refined, high-society husband anymore. She saw a cheating, embezzling parasite who had humiliated her on the most public stage possible. Jasmine crossed her arms over her chest, her face twisting into a mask of pure, unfiltered disgust. She took a step back, distancing herself from the garbage being hauled away. "Bail you out with what money, Trent?" Jasmine spat, her voice dripping with venom. "You stole it all to play sugar daddy to a 20-year-old whore. Rot in a cell. I hope you choke." Trent wailed in pure agony as the officers forcefully shoved his head down, tossing him into the back of the sweltering police cruiser like a sack of trash. The heavy door slammed shut instantly, muffling his pathetic screams. As the cruiser reversed out of the plaza and sped away, carrying the brother-in-law to a concrete cell, I calmly adjusted my coat. Two down. The real destruction was just about to begin. The wailing sirens of the Atlanta Police Department cruisers gradually faded into the stifling afternoon heat, leaving a heavy, suffocating silence in their wake. The spectacle of Trent being hauled away like a common criminal had completely paralyzed the remaining members of the family. Evelyn stood frozen at the bottom of the grand concrete stairs. Her perfectly contoured makeup was beginning to run, and the immaculate tweed suit she wore suddenly looked less like the armor of a high society matriarch and more like the costume of a very tired, very old woman. She looked at the empty space where her son-in-law had just been violently arrested. She looked down at Derrick, her golden child, who was still curled in a fetal position on the dirty pavement, weeping over the total annihilation of his corporate empire. Finally, she looked at the foreclosed deed to her historic Buckhead mansion fluttering uselessly in the gentle Georgia breeze. In a matter of 20 minutes, the glorious, untouchable empire that Evelyn had spent 3 decades meticulously building through lies, manipulation, and relentless social climbing had been entirely decimated. The wealthy onlookers, the very people whose approval Evelyn valued above her own soul, were openly whispering, pointing and recording her family's absolute destruction. Seeing her son completely stripped of his corporate throne and her son-in-law caged in the back of a police cruiser, Evelyn experienced a sudden, terrifying moment of clarity. The arrogant, sneering matriarch who had just ordered me to crawl back to the ghetto vanished into thin air. In her place emerged a desperate, cornered animal who suddenly realized that the woman she had tormented for 7 years now held the keys to her entire existence. Evelyn's legs gave out. She collapsed onto the hard stone patio, the fabric of her expensive skirt tearing against the rough pavement. She didn't try to stand back up. Instead, she scrambled forward on her hands and knees, crawling across the concrete toward me like a pathetic, groveling beggar. Tears, thick, dark, and heavy with mascara, poured from her eyes as she reached out with trembling, desperate hands. Evelyn violently grabbed the hem of my tailored beige trench coat, gripping the premium fabric so tightly her knuckles turned completely white. "Kendra, please!" Evelyn wailed, her voice cracking into a high-pitched, hysterical sob that echoed across the quiet courtyard. She looked up at me, her face contorted in a mask of absolute manufactured agony. "You cannot do this to us. You cannot just destroy our lives and walk away. We are family. We are Black women operating in a world that already wants to see us fail. We have to stick together. We have to protect each other from the system." I stared down at her, my expression completely unchanged. The sheer, unadulterated audacity of this woman was almost fascinating to witness. "The Lord commands us to show grace." Evelyn sobbed loudly, rocking back and forth on her knees, playing to the crowd of onlookers, desperately trying to cast herself as a victim of my unprovoked wrath. "He commands us to grant forgiveness to those who trespass against us. You are a good Christian woman, Kendra. I know you are. Please, I am begging you, find it in your heart to forgive us for our transgressions. Do not leave my son with nothing. Give us the house back." I looked down at the pathetic woman clinging to my coat. The hypocrisy of her invoking racial solidarity and religious guilt after spending 7 years systematically trying to break my spirit was absolutely repulsive. I didn't feel a single ounce of pity. I didn't feel a shred of Christian grace. I firmly grabbed her wrists and brutally peeled her manicured fingers off my coat, shoving her hands away with absolute unfiltered disgust. I took a deliberate step backward, forcing her to remain kneeling in the dirt. "Don't you dare invoke God or racial solidarity to me, Evelyn." I said, my voice dropping to a lethal icy register that made her flinch as if she had been slapped. Where was your Christian grace 3 years ago when my mother passed away? Evelyn's fake sobbing hitched in her throat. Her eyes widened. Where was your solidarity when you showed up 2 hours late to my mother's funeral repast, wearing a bright red cocktail dress, just to make sure everyone stared at you? I demanded, my words slicing through the humid air, like a scalpel exposing the darkest, most vile corners of her soul to the listening crowd. You walked into my childhood church, looked at the modest catered food my grieving father had spent his last savings to provide, and loudly complained to the pastor that the event was entirely too ghetto for your sophisticated tastes. Evelyn shrank backward, covering her face with her shaking hands, but I refused to let her hide. You handed out Derrick's corporate business cards to my weeping relatives over my mother's closed casket, I continued mercilessly. You stood in the sanctuary and told my father that my mother's passing was a blessing, because now I could finally focus entirely on serving your son. You didn't care about black women sticking together then, Evelyn. You only care now because your bank accounts are empty, your son is ruined, and your reputation is completely dead. I was wrong, Evelyn cried, her voice muffled behind her hands. I was so arrogant and foolish. I will apologize to your father. I will do whatever you want, just please. I knelt down slightly, bringing my face level with hers. Your apology is as worthless as your son's company, I whispered softly, ensuring my words sliced directly through her pathetic, fake tears. And we both know this has never been about my background or my parents. We both know the real reason you hated me from the exact moment Derrick put a ring on my finger. Evelyn froze, her breath caught in her throat. You despised me because I couldn't give you the one thing you wanted, I said, my voice projecting clearly, so Jasmine, Derrick, and the entire gathering crowd could hear every single syllable. You spent every single Thanksgiving and Christmas dinner loudly reminding the entire extended family that I was a barren, defective woman who was denying you the ultimate joy of becoming a grandmother. You called me an empty vessel. You told Jasmine I was less than a real woman. Evelyn stared up at me with wide, terrified eyes. The absolute panic radiating from her body was intensely palpable. She knew exactly what I was about to say. But it was highly hypocritical of you to cry about not having a grandchild, Evelyn. I continued, standing back up to my full height and adjusting my sunglasses. Especially when you already had one secretly hidden away in the affluent suburbs. Derrick's head snapped up from the pavement, his neck cracking audibly in the sudden silence. The sheer terror in his bloodshot eyes was almost intoxicating. Jasmine gasped, stepping backward until her shoulder hit the cold stone pillar. Her jaw dropped open as she looked frantically between her weeping mother and her shattered brother. The pristine, untouchable image of Derrick, the perfect Christian CEO and the golden child of the family, was completely disintegrating right before her eyes. A child? Jasmine stammered, her voice barely a whisper. Derrick has a child. Mother, what is she talking about? Tell me she's lying. Tell me Derrick didn't have a baby with someone else. Evelyn squeezed her eyes shut, sobbing into her hands. She couldn't formulate a single word of denial. Her silence was the most damning confession possible. She can't deny it, Jasmine, I said, brightly smiling as the final devastating piece of their destruction fell perfectly into place. Because your mother has been the one organizing the hush money payments to the mistress for the past 4 years. And unfortunately for Derrick, his secret baby mama is incredibly punctual when it comes to collecting her cash. Did you honestly believe I would never check the detailed transaction history on your personal banking accounts, Evelyn? I asked, my voice projecting crisp and clear across the sunlit courtyard. Did you really think the woman who runs the financial audits for a private equity firm wouldn't notice a massive recurring black hole in her own husband's corporate ledgers? Evelyn remained paralyzed on the concrete, her breath hitching in her throat as she stared up at me. The crowd of onlookers leaned in, completely captivated by the unraveling of the matriarch's darkest, most tightly guarded secret. I know exactly where all the missing money went. I continued, offering a bright, merciless smile as the final devastating pieces of their destruction fell perfectly into place. I know all about the quiet little luxury townhouse located in Decatur. And I know all about the 4-year-old boy currently living there. He has his father's eyes, doesn't he? He is your grandson, Evelyn. You spent years meticulously protecting his sordid existence to preserve your son's pristine image, while publicly tearing my soul apart to hide the truth. Jasmine let out a sound that was half gasp, half scream. She took another staggering step backward, looking at her mother as if Evelyn had suddenly morphed into a grotesque, unrecognizable monster. "Mother, tell me this is a lie!" Jasmine demanded, her voice shaking violently. "Tell me you didn't know about this. Tell me you haven't been hiding a bastard child from our family." "She can't deny it, Jasmine," I interjected smoothly, refusing to let Evelyn formulate a single lie. "Because your mother has been the one organizing the payments for the past 2 years. When Derrick's day trading addiction drained his personal checking accounts, your mother eagerly stepped in to cover his tracks. Every single month on the 15th, exactly $5,000 was transferred from Evelyn's account to a shell corporation registered in Decatur. She started liquidating her own designer jewelry and secretly selling off your grandmother's antique heirlooms just to keep the mistress quiet. She did everything in her power to protect Derrick's flawless public reputation, even if it meant lying to her own daughter and emotionally abusing her daughter-in-law. Jasmine stared at Evelyn in pure, unfiltered horror. The realization hit her like a physical blow, a devastating parallel to her own shattered marriage. The mother who constantly preached about strict Christian values, unwavering fidelity, and the absolute sanctity of the family legacy had been actively facilitating her brother's infidelity. "You hid a child from me!" Jasmine screamed, the sheer betrayal fracturing her voice. She pointed a trembling finger at the weeping matriarch. "You let me sit at Thanksgiving dinner year after year, listening to you viciously berate Kendra for not getting pregnant while you knew Derrick had a child living 20 minutes away. You let me listen to Trent preach about family values while my own brother was paying off a mistress. I was protecting our family," Evelyn wailed, finally dropping her hands from her ruined face. Her makeup was entirely smeared, running in dark, ugly rivers down her cheeks. She looked frantically between her daughter and the judging crowd. "If the country club found out Derrick had an illegitimate child with a common secretary, we would have been completely ruined. The board of directors would have questioned his moral character. I had to keep the girl quiet. I was doing it for our legacy. I was doing it for you, Jasmine." "What legacy, Evelyn?" I asked coldly, stepping closer to her kneeling figure, my shadow falling over her face. "You have no estate. Your son has no company. Your son-in-law is currently sitting in the back of a police cruiser for wire fraud. The legacy you sacrificed your soul to protect was nothing but a fragile, pathetic illusion financed entirely by the woman you treated like garbage." Derrick scrambled forward on his knees, his tailored suit completely ruined by the dirt and grime of the courthouse steps. He reached out toward me with shaking, desperate hands, tears streaming down his face. "Kendra, please, you have to understand," Derrick begged, his voice cracking into a pathetic, high-pitched whine. "It meant absolutely nothing. The girl was a mistake, a terrible drunken mistake after a corporate holiday party. I never loved her. I only loved you. I was going to tell you, but I knew it would break your heart." "Don't insult my intelligence, Derrick," I said, stepping back so his filthy, grasping hands could not touch my shoes. "You don't love me. You loved the comfortable, pristine life my invisible money afforded you. You loved playing the powerful, untouchable executive while I played the meek, submissive wife. And the most pathetic part is that you actually believed you were the one in control. You really thought I was just a naive, uneducated woman who was too intimidated by your family's social standing to ever question your late nights at the office." Before Derrick could offer another pathetic, sniveling excuse, the sharp, aggressive screech of premium tires echoed through the quiet courtyard. A gleaming, heavily customized white Range Rover aggressively jumped the curb and sped directly into the courthouse's restricted valet loading zone, ignoring the bold yellow warning lines. The vehicle came to a halting, dramatic stop just a few yards away from the patio where our public meltdown was taking place. The tinted driver's side window rolled down, loud hip-hop music blaring obnoxiously from the interior speakers. The heavy door swung open and a young woman stepped out into the humid Atlanta air. She wore oversized designer sunglasses, a skin-tight pink velour tracksuit, and carried a bright yellow Hermes Birkin bag that cost more than a small car. She chewed a piece of gum, loudly popping a bubble, as she casually surveyed the scene. It was Destiny, Derrick's former executive assistant and the mother of his secret child. Destiny slammed the car door shut and marched straight up the stone steps, completely oblivious to the crowd of wealthy onlookers, the lingering tension of the police presence, and the atmosphere of total devastation surrounding the family. She marched directly toward Evelyn and Derrick, her long acrylic nails clicking aggressively against her expensive yellow handbag. "Evelyn, I have been calling your phone all damn morning," Destiny shouted, her voice cutting through the heavy tension like a blaring siren. "Where is my envelope? You promised the transfer would clear by Friday morning, and my bank account is still showing zero. I have private preschool fees, a car payment, and a vacation to Cabo to book. I am not playing these games with you anymore." Evelyn gasped, scrambling to her feet as quickly as her shaking legs would allow, utterly terrified by the mistress's sudden, highly public appearance. "Destiny, are you insane? Keep your voice down. Do you have any idea where you are? You cannot just barge onto the courthouse steps making demands like some kind of street thug. We will send the money. Just get back in your vehicle and leave immediately before you make this situation any worse." "I am not going anywhere, Evelyn," Destiny snapped back, planting her hands firmly on her hips and glaring at the older woman, popping another bubble of gum. "I don't work for your son anymore, and I certainly don't care about your precious high society rules. Derrick owes me money for my child. He has been dodging my calls, and I know exactly why." Destiny turned her head and finally looked at me, pulling her oversized sunglasses down the bridge of her nose. She offered me a mocking, triumphant smile, clearly assuming she had the upper hand in a classic divorce battle. "Sorry about your failed marriage, Kendra," Destiny said, her tone dripping with fake sympathy and extreme entitlement. "But Derrick has a real family to take care of now. My son needs his father's financial support before you try to take half of his company in the settlement. So I want my cut today." I couldn't help it. I looked at the entitled mistress, looked at my horrified ex-husband, and let out a genuine, full-throated laugh that echoed across the entire courtyard. My laughter wasn't the hysterical, broken sound of a woman who had just been bested by her husband's younger, flashier mistress. It was a rich, full-throated sound of pure, unadulterated amusement that echoed off the stone pillars of the Fulton County Courthouse. The sheer magnificent irony of the situation was almost too perfect to have been orchestrated. Destiny's arrogant, triumphant smile instantly vanished. Her meticulously arched eyebrows knitted together in deep confusion. She looked from my highly amused face to Derrick, who was still kneeling in the dirt, weeping silently into his hands. She looked at Evelyn, whose expensive tweed suit was torn and covered in concrete dust. Finally, Destiny seemed to realize that this was not the typical high society divorce dynamic she was so confidently used to dealing with. "Why are you laughing?" Destiny demanded, her voice losing a fraction of its aggressive edge, replaced by a creeping sense of unease. She shifted her weight, clutching her yellow Birkin bag tightly to her chest. "This is not a joke. Derrick is a very wealthy man, and I am going to make sure my son gets his rightful legal share of the fortune. I'm not leaving until I get my check." "Oh, Destiny." I sighed, wiping a single tear of pure mirth from the corner of my eye. I took a step closer to the bewildered mistress, offering her a look of genuine, albeit condescending pity. "You really should have checked the stock market, or perhaps the local news, before you decided to make this grand entrance. You are demanding a massive piece of a vast corporate fortune that simply does not exist anymore. You are trying to bleed a completely dry stone." Destiny scoffed, rolling her eyes dramatically, completely dismissing my words. "Whatever, you're just a bitter ex-wife trying to scare me off. I know exactly how much Derrick makes. I used to manage his calendar, remember?" You used to manage the calendar of a man who was spending my money. I corrected her, my voice dropping back to that lethal icy register. Derrick doesn't have a fortune, Destiny. The health tech company, I just had him fired by his own board of directors for severe federal fraud. He was stripped of all his equity and severance. The historic Buckhead mansion I foreclosed on it 20 minutes ago. Evelyn is officially homeless. The corporate credit cards you've been using, I deactivated them this morning. Derrick is broke. He is jobless, and by the end of the day, he won't even have a car. Destiny froze. The gum chewing stopped completely. She stared at me, searching my face for any sign of a bluff, but found only cold, undeniable truth. Slowly, she turned her head to look down at her cash cow. Derrick, Destiny asked, her voice trembling slightly. Derrick, tell me this crazy woman is lying. Tell me you still have my money. Derrick scrambled forward on his knees, reaching out to grab Destiny's pink velour pant leg. Destiny, baby, please, just keep your voice down, he begged, his voice a pathetic, raspy whisper. I'll get you the money, I swear. I just need a little time to liquidate some assets. You have to leave right now. The press is coming. Just go home. Destiny looked down at the weeping, pathetic man clinging to her ankle. The realization hit her with the force of a freight train. The limitless ATM she had built her entire lavish lifestyle around was permanently out of order. Her luxury condo, her designer bags, her private preschool tuition, all of it was gone in an instant. The entitled, smug mistress vanished. In her place stood a furious, cornered creditor who had just realized she had been played. You're broke! Destiny shrieked, kicking her leg violently to break Derrick's grip on her tracksuit. She stumbled backward, pointing a furious finger at him. You lied to me. You told me you were a multimillionaire. You told me you were going to leave her and set up a trust fund for our son. I wasted 4 years of my prime playing second fiddle to this family, keeping my mouth shut, and you have nothing. I'll fix it, I promise, Derrick cried desperately, trying to stand up but lacking the physical strength. Just don't say anything else in front of her. She's recording everything. I don't give a damn what she's recording. Destiny roared, completely losing her composure. She paced back and forth on the concrete, waving her arms frantically. You owe me. If the company is gone, then what about the offshore accounts, Derrick? What about the money in the Cayman Islands? The entire courtyard went completely deathly silent. Evelyn let out a strangled, horrifying gasp, clutching her chest as if she had just been shot. Derrick's eyes rolled back in his head, his face turning an ashen, sickly gray. What did you just say? I asked softly, my heart leaping with sudden predatory excitement. Destiny spun around to face me, fueled entirely by spite and the desperate need to extract whatever cash she could. The offshore accounts? She yelled, pointing directly at Derrick's trembling form. He bragged about it to me all the time. He said he was skimming profits from the venture capital funding and hiding it in 3 separate untraceable shell accounts in the Cayman Islands. He said he was dodging the IRS, so he wouldn't have to pay federal taxes on the liquid cash. He told me he had at least $2 million stashed away that you and the government didn't know about. I want my cut of that money right now. I stood perfectly still, letting the magnitude of her public confession wash over me. For 5 years, I had meticulously tracked every single penny that moved through Derrick's company. I had found the fraud, the manipulated FDA data, the forged mortgage, and the embezzlement. But there was always a missing $2 million that I couldn't quite locate. I had suspected he was hiding it, but I didn't have the legal jurisdiction or the specific account locations to subpoena the international records. It was the one missing puzzle piece that had been driving me insane. And this loud, angry, entitled mistress had just handed it to me on a silver platter, screaming it at the top of her lungs in front of dozens of witnesses. Destiny, shut your mouth! Derrick screamed, his voice tearing his vocal cords. He lunged toward her, but his legs tangled and he face-planted hard onto the concrete. You stupid, ignorant girl, you just ruined me. No, Derrick. I corrected him, my voice ringing out with absolute triumphant clarity. You ruined yourself. But Destiny here just guaranteed your final destination. I pulled my smartphone from my pocket and quickly typed out a highly encrypted message to Elias, my corporate attorney who was waiting nearby. Cayman Islands, 3 shell accounts. IRS tax evasion. Thank you, Destiny, I said, offering the furious mistress a polite nod. You just provided the exact verbal testimony I needed to secure a federal tax evasion charge against my ex-husband. You might not get your $4,000 today, but you did just ensure that Derrick will spend the next 2 decades in a federal penitentiary. Destiny blinked suddenly, realizing the catastrophic legal implications of what she had just blurted out in a crowded public space. She looked at the growing crowd of lawyers, some of whom were already dialing their phones. She looked at Derrick, who was hyperventilating into the pavement. Without another word, Destiny turned on her heel, sprinted back to her white Range Rover, and peeled out of the loading zone, leaving her baby daddy completely at the mercy of the federal government. The screeching tires of Destiny's white Range Rover had barely faded into the heavy downtown traffic before a new, far more intimidating sound rumbled across the courthouse plaza. A massive heavy-duty commercial van, topped with a towering satellite dish and emblazoned with the bold red and blue logo of Atlanta Channel 8 Action News, aggressively jumped the curb. It parked diagonally across the exact same restricted loading zone Destiny had just vacated. The sudden screeching halt of the heavy vehicle sent a fresh wave of panic rippling through the remaining members of the family. For the past hour, this public execution had been confined to a small, albeit affluent audience of passing lawyers, paralegals, and courthouse staff. But now the Fourth Estate had arrived. The side door of the news van violently slid open. A burly cameraman leapt out, hoisting a massive, heavy-lensed shoulder rig, a blinding LED spotlight, already engaged and burning through the humid Georgia air. Right behind him was David Thorne, the city's most ruthless and highly decorated investigative reporter. David didn't stumble upon this scene by accident. Exactly 45 minutes before I walked out of the divorce hearing, my encrypted, anonymous source email had hit his desk, promising the absolute documented destruction of Atlanta's most prominent high society family. I had promised him the scoop of a lifetime, and looking at the wreckage on the concrete, he knew I had delivered. "Roll camera! Keep it rolling! Get the sun on the ground!" David barked to his cameraman, sprinting up the grand concrete steps with his microphone extended like a spear. Derrick, still kneeling on the pavement and hyperventilating from the realization that he was facing federal prison time, threw his arms over his head. He curled into a tight, pathetic ball, desperately trying to shield his tear-stained, snot-covered face from the blinding glare of the television light. Jasmine let out a horrified shriek, immediately ripping her designer purse off her shoulder and pressing it flat against her face to hide her ruined makeup as she backed away toward the stone pillars. "Derrick, Derrick!" David Thorne shouted, shoving the microphone mere inches from my ex-husband's trembling head. David Thorne. Channel 8 Newscare. To comment on the emergency board meeting that just took place. Can you confirm you've been permanently ousted as CEO for federal fraud? Are the rumors of offshore Cayman Island accounts true? Derrick just whimpered a pathetic broken sound, unable to formulate a single coherent word of defense. "Jasmine." David pivoted smoothly, aiming the microphone at my sister-in-law hiding behind her purse. "Is it true your husband Trent was just arrested by the APD Financial Crimes Unit for grand larceny? Did you know he was embezzling corporate funds?" Jasmine didn't answer. She turned her back to the camera, sobbing uncontrollably, completely trapped on the steps. Then the blinding LED spotlight swung toward Evelyn. The matriarch was still on her hands and knees in her torn tweed suit, the dust of the courthouse steps clinging to her once immaculate wardrobe. But the moment the harsh television light hit her face, something terrifying and deeply ingrained clicked inside Evelyn's mind. Decades of ruthless social climbing, PR training, and high society survival instincts violently kicked in. Evelyn stopped crying. She forced herself to stand up on her shaking legs. She aggressively wiped the running mascara from her cheeks, smoothed down the front of her ruined jacket, and stepped directly in front of Derrick, attempting to shield her broken golden child from the camera lens. She lifted her chin, pasting on a mask of deeply wounded righteous indignation. "Get that camera out of my family's face, right this instant," Evelyn commanded, her voice trembling but projecting loudly for the microphone. She pointed an accusing manicured finger directly at me. Do not ask my son these ridiculous questions. If you want the truth, you need to look at her. Look at the monster who is doing this to us. David Thorne eagerly shifted the microphone toward Evelyn, sensing the dramatic goldmine of a live public meltdown. Ma'am, are you saying these allegations of fraud and embezzlement are false? They are absolute fabricated lies! Evelyn shrieked, playing the role of the weeping, victimized matriarch to absolute perfection. She looked directly into the camera lens, her eyes wide with manufactured agony. We are a prominent, God-fearing, respectable family in this community. That woman standing right there is my son's ex-wife, Kendra. She is a deeply disturbed, violently bitter, and mentally unstable woman who could not handle the pressure of our high society lifestyle. I stood perfectly still, my hands resting casually in the pockets of my beige trench coat, watching her dig her own grave on live television. She is a charity case who is throwing a psychotic tantrum because my son finally had the courage to divorce her. Evelyn continued, her voice rising in a frantic crescendo. She hacked into private corporate servers. She called in false malicious police reports to have my innocent son-in-law arrested. She is forging real estate documents to try and steal my historic home. This is a targeted, coordinated harassment campaign against a successful Black family, driven entirely by a jealous, ghetto woman who wants to destroy what she could never earn. The crowd of onlookers murmured, some completely shocked by Evelyn's brazen, bold-faced lies. She was throwing every single buzzword she could think of at the camera, hoping that if she screamed loud enough, the narrative would magically shift back into her favor. She needs to be in a psychiatric ward, not on the evening news. Evelyn sobbed, producing fresh crocodile tears for the lens. Please, I am begging the authorities to step in and protect my family from this deranged stalker. David Thorne turned to me, the cameraman panning the heavy lens to capture my reaction. They expected me to be furious. They expected me to scream back, to lose my composure, to validate Evelyn's narrative of the angry, bitter ex-wife. Instead, I offered the camera a polite, devastatingly calm smile. I took my hands out of my coat pockets. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't look at Evelyn. I walked smoothly toward David Thorne, my designer heels clicking with absolute authority against the concrete. David, isn't it? I asked, my voice projecting crisp, clear, and perfectly steady over the microphone. Yes, ma'am, the reporter replied, clearly taken aback by my chilling composure amidst the absolute chaos. Evelyn is actually right about one thing, I said, looking directly into the camera lens, my expression shifting into something lethal and precise. There is a massive breaking story here today regarding a prominent Atlanta family, but it has absolutely nothing to do with a bitter divorce. I reached into my sleek leather tote bag and pulled out a small, gleaming silver USB flash drive. I held it up between my index and middle finger, letting the bright LED spotlight catch the metallic surface. Evelyn's fake sobbing instantly died in her throat. She stared at the small silver device, her eyes widening in pure, unadulterated horror. She didn't know what was on it, but the predatory confidence in my eyes told her it was something lethal. Kendra, what are you doing? Evelyn rasped, her survival instincts screaming at her to run. Don't you dare give them anything. I ignored her completely, holding the flash drive out to the lead investigative reporter. David, I said, my voice echoing off the stone pillars. I highly suggest you plug this into your news van's laptop immediately, because what you are about to find on this drive is going to completely rewrite the history of Atlanta's high society, and it is going to put that weeping woman in federal prison. David Thorne didn't hesitate for a fraction of a second. He snatched the gleaming silver flash drive from my outstretched hand with the ravenous eagerness of a predator sensing a fresh kill. Without breaking eye contact with me, he snapped his fingers at a young headset-wearing field producer who had just jogged up behind him from the Channel 8 news van. Plug it in, now. Get it on the primary monitor in the truck and verify the headers, David barked, tossing the small drive to the producer. The young man caught it seamlessly and sprinted back to the mobile broadcasting station. Evelyn let out a feral, unhinged shriek. The polished high society matriarch was entirely gone, replaced by a terrified animal watching a steel trap snap shut. She lunged forward, her hands clawing the humid air, desperately trying to intercept the producer before he could reach the van. Stop him! That is stolen digital property. You cannot broadcast that. Evelyn screamed, her voice cracking into a hideous grating screech. I will sue this entire network into bankruptcy. I will have your FCC license permanently revoked. A burly courthouse security guard who had been silently watching the spectacle unfold alongside the affluent crowd stepped smoothly into Evelyn's path. He didn't draw a weapon, but he crossed his massive arms and planted his feet, effectively blocking her from reaching the news van. Evelyn crashed against his chest, bounced off, and stumbled backward onto the concrete in her ruined tweed suit. I wouldn't worry about FCC licenses right now, Evelyn, I said, my voice projecting crisp and clear directly into David Thorne's microphone. I would be far more concerned about the Internal Revenue Service and the Federal Bureau of Prisons. David Thorne turned the microphone back to me, the heavy camera lens zooming in tight on my calm, impassive face. The red live light on top of the camera burned brightly in the afternoon sun. Hundreds of thousands of people across the greater Atlanta metropolitan area were currently watching this broadcast from their living rooms, offices, and smartphones. For the record, ma'am, can you state your name and explain exactly what is on that drive? David asked, his investigative instincts fully engaged. My name is Kendra, I stated, looking directly down the barrel of the camera lens, projecting absolute chilling authority. And what your producer is currently loading onto your news monitors are the unedited, fully unredacted IRS audit files, internal bank ledgers, and offshore routing numbers for the highly esteemed Atlanta Youth Foundation. The crowd of onlookers, many of whom were wealthy, prominent figures in the city's legal and business sectors, let out a collective, audible gasp. The Atlanta Youth Foundation was Evelyn's crown jewel. It was a massive, highly publicized nonprofit organization ostensibly dedicated to providing scholarships, after-school programs, and community resources to underprivileged, at-risk youth in the city's most neglected neighborhoods. For 15 years, Evelyn had paraded herself around Atlanta as the foundation's benevolent, selfless executive director. She hosted extravagant high society galas at the country club, guilt-tripping local politicians, athletes, and business owners into writing massive tax-deductible checks to fund her supposedly noble cause. It was the absolute cornerstone of her flawless public image. Are you alleging financial mismanagement within the foundation? David Thorne asked, his eyes widening at the implication. I am not alleging mismanagement, David. I am stating with irrefutable documentary evidence that it is a massive systemic criminal enterprise, I replied smoothly, making sure my enunciation was flawless for the millions watching at home. For over a decade, those disadvantaged children have not seen a single solitary dime of that money. Instead, Evelyn has been using the Atlanta Youth Foundation as her own personal tax-exempt slush fund. That is a lie! Turn the cameras off! Evelyn screamed from the pavement, scrambling to her feet. She held her hands up to block the glaring LED spotlight. She hacked my computer. She manufactured those documents. She is a deranged stalker trying to destroy a charity. I didn't even glance in her direction. I kept my eyes locked on the camera. If you open the folder labeled Expenditure Reports, you will see exactly how Evelyn maintained her flawless, wealthy socialite image on a nonprofit salary. I explained patiently to the viewers at home. Last year alone, Evelyn used charity funds meant for after-school tutoring programs to purchase over $250,000 in authentic designer wardrobes from Paris and Milan. She used donations meant for youth sports equipment to finance 3 separate luxury vacations to the Maldives, complete with private yacht rentals and exclusive helicopter transfers, which she fraudulently wrote off as international philanthropic research retreats. The wealthy courthouse crowd began to murmur angrily. Some of the lawyers standing on the steps had personally attended Evelyn's winter galas. They had written 5-figure checks believing they were helping the community. Now they were realizing they had been utterly spectacularly conned. And the $50,000 catering bill for today's post-divorce celebration lunch at her exclusive country club, I added, raising a single eyebrow. That was also paid for this morning using the foundation's corporate debit card. Suddenly, David Thorne's earpiece crackled loudly. The reporter pressed his fingers against his ear, listening intently to the producer in the news van. His jaw slowly dropped. He looked at me, then looked at Evelyn, his journalistic eyes flashing with the thrill of a career-defining scoop. David, we have it. The producer's voice buzzed through the earpiece loud enough for those standing close to hear. The ledgers are clean. The IP addresses match. We have wire transfers from the charity directly into her personal checking accounts. It's staggering. We're talking millions of dollars in stolen donations. Smelling blood in this water, David Thorne aggressively pivoted his body away from me and rushed directly toward Evelyn. The massive cameramen followed in lockstep, trapping the matriarch against the heavy stone balustrade of the courthouse stairs. "Evelyn Harrington!" David shouted, shoving his microphone mere inches from her trembling, tear-streaked face. "Channel 8 News. How long have you been stealing from underprivileged children to buy your designer clothes? Did you use charity donations to pay for your son's tailored suits? Are you prepared to face federal prison time for tax evasion and grand larceny?" "Sto sons." The questions hit her like rapid physical blows. The flashing cameras from other newly arriving local news agencies joined the fray, blinding her in a relentless strobe light of public accountability. Evelyn desperately raised her oversized, heavily branded designer handbag, a bag paid for by stolen youth donations, to cover her face. She tried to shield her ruined makeup from the harsh glare of the television lights, but there was absolutely nowhere to hide. "No comment, I have absolutely no comment," Evelyn screamed frantically, pushing against the tight circle of aggressive journalists that had completely surrounded her. "Get these cameras out of my face. I am a respected pillar of this community. You cannot treat me like a common street thug. Where is the security? Why is nobody helping me?" She looked wildly around the courtyard, desperately searching for a single friendly face, an ally or a savior among the high society peers she had spent her life trying to impress. She found nothing but intense, burning, unfiltered judgment. Standing on live television, cornered like a rat in a trap, the untouchable matriarch of Atlanta high society was finally exposed to the entire world as a desperate, thieving fraud. The relentless, suffocating barrage of questions from David Thorne and the rapidly growing swarm of local reporters battered Evelyn like a physical assault. The flashbulbs popped with blinding intensity, creating a chaotic strobe light effect over the sun-baked concrete of the Fulton County Courthouse. Dozens of microphones branded with the logos of every major news affiliate in the greater Atlanta metropolitan area were aggressively thrust into the matriarch's tear-stained, terrified face. The wealthy onlookers, the very people Evelyn had spent decades meticulously courting, had completely turned on her. A prominent local judge who had just donated $10,000 at Evelyn's extravagant winter charity gala stepped forward from the crowd. His face was a mask of pure, unfiltered disgust. "Evelyn, you look me in the eye and tell me this is a lie," the judge demanded, his voice booming over the shouts of the press. "Tell me you didn't use our community donations to buy your ridiculous tweed suits and those diamond earrings. We trusted you with our money to help underprivileged kids in this city." Evelyn could not formulate a single coherent sentence. She backed away, shaking her head side to side in rapid, frantic motions. The polished, untouchable matriarch of Atlanta high society was entirely gone, replaced by a cornered, hyperventilating criminal who had just been publicly stripped of her flawless disguise. She desperately raised her heavily branded designer handbag to cover her face, trying to shield herself from the harsh glare of the television lights. But the reporters simply flanked her, trapping her against the heavy stone railing of the courthouse patio, and then cutting through the aggressive shouts of the journalists and the angry demands of the betrayed socialites. A piercing, elegant ringtone erupted from inside Evelyn's leather tote bag. It was a crisp, classical violin concerto, Vivaldi's Four Seasons, a pretentious high society melody that felt entirely absurdly out of place amidst the hostile, sweaty chaos of her public execution. Evelyn froze. A sudden, desperate wave of misguided hope washed over her ruined features. In her fractured, panicked mind, she mistakenly believed that salvation was calling. She fumbled blindly inside the leather tote, her shaking fingers desperate to retrieve the device. When she finally pulled the smartphone out, the bright screen illuminated her tear-streaked face. I could clearly see the caller identification flashing in bold, elegant letters across the screen. It was Charles Montgomery, the highly influential, notoriously strict president of the Peachtree Elite Country Club, the most exclusive, heavily gated old money institution in the entire state of Georgia. It was the absolute epicenter of Evelyn's social universe. "Charles! Oh, thank God you are calling!" Evelyn gasped, frantically swiping the screen to answer. Her voice pitched into a hysterical, grating whine. You have to send the club's private security team down to the courthouse immediately. These ruthless journalists are physically harassing me. You must have them send cars to escort us away from here. They are ruining my peace. Tell them who I am. In her absolute uncoordinated panic, Evelyn's trembling thumb slipped on the glass screen. She accidentally pressed the speakerphone icon, turning the volume up to maximum capacity. Sensing the dramatic goldmine of a live, unscripted phone call, David Thorne immediately shoved his heavy broadcasting microphone directly toward the bottom of Evelyn's glowing smartphone, ensuring that the local television networks captured every single syllable of the impending interaction. The heavy silence that suddenly fell over the immediate crowd was instantly broken by the cold, unforgiving voice of the country club president, radiating from the small digital speaker. I am not sending my security team to rescue you, Evelyn, Charles Montgomery stated, his deep aristocratic voice dripping with pure, unadulterated disgust. I am currently sitting in the executive lounge overlooking the 18th hole, watching you humiliate yourself on live television, along with the entire board of directors. Evelyn gasped sharply, her eyes widening in absolute horror as the final remnants of her false reality shattered completely. Charles, please listen to me. It is a massive misunderstanding, she pleaded desperately, her voice cracking under the intense pressure of the live public broadcast. I can explain the accounting errors with the foundation. I can explain everything. It's a setup by my son's bitter ex-wife. Do not try to lie your way out of this one, Evelyn, the president interrupted, fiercely silencing her pathetic excuses with brutal authority. We have been listening to every word Kendra just revealed. My financial officers have already verified the authenticity of the IRS audit files circulating on the news networks. You used our prestigious venue to host fraudulent charity galas. You manipulated our generous members into writing massive checks that you used to finance your extravagant, fake lifestyle. You stole from the most vulnerable children in our city to buy designer luggage. The crowd of betrayed socialites erupted into loud cheers of agreement, validating the president's harsh condemnation. You have completely disgraced the pristine reputation of this institution. Charles continued, delivering the ultimate devastating blow. Effective immediately, the board of directors has unanimously voted to permanently revoke your family's membership to the Peachtree Elite Country Club. No, Charles, you can't, Evelyn shrieked, clutching the phone with both hands as if it were a physical lifeline. I am a founding legacy member. Your locker in the clubhouse is being emptied by the staff as we speak, Charles announced coldly, entirely ignoring her wails. Your name has been permanently erased from our elite registry. Furthermore, you are officially banned from attending the upcoming annual Winter Gala and any future social events hosted within our city limits. You are blacklisted from high society. If you, Derrick, or any member of your disgraced family ever attempt to set foot on this property again, I will have you arrested and prosecuted for criminal trespassing. You are no longer welcome among us, Evelyn. You are nothing but a common thief. Goodbye. The call disconnected with a sharp electronic click, leaving a dial tone that sounded exactly like a flatlining heartbeat echoing through the reporter's microphone. Evelyn stood frozen against the stone railing. Her smartphone slipped from her numb, trembling fingers and shattered on the hard concrete pavement below. The devastating reality of her absolute ruin finally crushed her fragile, status-obsessed mind. She had lost her stolen wealth, her false charitable legacy, and the elite social standing she had sacrificed her soul to achieve. She was now a documented criminal and a completely disgraced social outcast, entirely rejected on live television by the very people she worshipped. Her eyes rolled back into her head. Her knees completely gave out beneath her. Without making a single other sound, Evelyn collapsed forward, fainting dead away onto the pristine bricks of the courthouse steps, surrounded by the merciless, blinding flashes of the cameras. The heavy, sickening thud of Evelyn's unconscious body, hitting the sun-baked concrete of the courthouse plaza, barely registered over the chaotic, rapid-fire clicking of the news cameras. The untouchable matriarch lay completely motionless, her face pressed against the dusty pavement, entirely abandoned by her own flesh and blood. Derrick remained curled in a pathetic ball just a few feet away, entirely consumed by his own spectacular financial ruin, to even notice that his mother had passed out. The aggressive reporters, sensing that the matriarch was temporarily out of commission, immediately turned their heavy lenses back toward me, eagerly waiting for my next devastating move. But before David Thorne could shout another invasive question into the humid Atlanta air, a loud, desperate voice interrupted the scene from the top of the stairs. "Wait! Hold everything! Stop the cameras!" A man shouted, his voice echoing off the towering marble columns of the Fulton County Courthouse. I turned my head slowly, adjusting my designer sunglasses, as a short, balding man in a shiny, poorly fitted gray suit pushed his way aggressively through the heavy oak doors. He was sweating profusely, clutching a battered leather briefcase under his left arm, while frantically waving a thick stack of legal papers in his right hand. It was Vance Derrick's notoriously aggressive, sleazy divorce attorney. Vance had represented Derrick during our hearing earlier that morning, acting with the exact same unearned arrogance and condescension as his client. He was the type of lawyer who thrived on bullying intimidated spouses and burying them in frivolous paperwork. Seeing the news vans and the flashing cameras, Vance clearly believed this was his moment to become a high-profile legal savior on live television. He marched directly down the grand concrete stairs, practically stepping over Evelyn's unconscious legs without a single downward glance. He puffed out his chest, glaring at me with a triumphant, predatory sneer that made my skin crawl. "You thought you could just pull a fast one on us, didn't you, Kendra?" Vance demanded, his voice booming across the courtyard for the benefit of the rolling cameras. He slapped the stack of papers against his open palm, looking around at the reporters to ensure they were recording his grand entrance. "You thought you could just hide a massive private equity firm and millions of dollars in corporate assets during a contested divorce proceeding and walk away scot-free. Well, I have breaking news for you and your little television audience. The state of Georgia takes asset concealment very seriously, and my client is not leaving this marriage completely empty-handed." Derrick slowly lifted his head from the pavement. A tiny, desperate glimmer of hope sparked in his bloodshot, tear-filled eyes as he looked at his attorney. "Vance, what is going on?" Derrick croaked, his voice raw from sobbing. "Did you find something? Can you stop her?" "I found the golden ticket, Derrick," Vance declared, proudly holding the document high in the air for the Channel 8 cameraman to capture. He pointed an accusing, dramatic finger directly at my chest. "Your conniving, manipulative ex-wife thought she was so incredibly smart, but she forgot to carefully review the amendments we made to the prenuptial agreement 3 years ago. I have a legally binding notarized addendum right here. It explicitly states that any commercial assets or corporate equity acquired by either party during the marriage are subject to a mandatory 50% split in the event of a divorce." The reporters immediately began whispering among themselves, sensing a massive multi-million-dollar legal showdown. Jasmine gasped, taking a tentative step forward, hoping that this sleazy, desperate lawyer had actually found a loophole to save their family from total financial annihilation. "That means, Kendra," Vance continued, stepping so uncomfortably close to me that I could smell the stale coffee and cheap cologne on his breath, "that Derrick is legally entitled to exactly half of your private equity firm. He is entitled to half of those offshore Cayman Island accounts you were just bragging about. And he is entitled to immediate aggressive spousal support to maintain the luxurious lifestyle he has grown accustomed to. I am filing an emergency injunction to freeze your personal and corporate bank accounts until my client gets every single penny he is owed." Derrick let out a breathless, manic laugh. He tried to scramble to his feet, leaning heavily against a patio chair for support. His ruined suit was covered in dust, but the arrogant, entitled monster inside him violently resurrected itself. "Do you hear that, Kendra?" Derrick shouted, a terrifying mix of relief and pure hatred washing over his face. He pointed at me, his hand shaking with adrenaline. "You can't get rid of me. I own half of everything you built. I get half of your firm. You are going to pay for what you did to my company." I did not flinch. I did not step back. I didn't even break eye contact with the sweating, triumphant lawyer standing inches from my face. I simply offered him a polite, chillingly serene smile. "That is a very passionate, highly theatrical speech, Vance," I replied, my voice echoing with absolute tranquility. "It is truly a shame that you just committed a federal crime on live television." Vance scoffed loudly, rolling his eyes dismissively for the cameras. "Don't try to intimidate me with your empty threats, little girl. I have been practicing family law in Atlanta for 20 years. This document is ironclad. You are going to pay." "Are you quite certain about that, counselor?" a smooth, deeply commanding voice asked from the back of the crowd. The wealthy onlookers and reporters parted like the Red Sea as a tall, impeccably dressed man stepped onto the courthouse plaza. He wore a custom-tailored midnight blue Tom Ford suit that made Vance's shiny gray attire look like cheap discarded rags. He carried a sleek modern briefcase and possessed an aura of absolute, undeniable authority. It was Elias, my personal corporate attorney and the managing partner of the most ruthless litigation firm on the East Coast. He had been quietly standing in the back of the crowd this entire time, observing the spectacular meltdown, waiting for my exact signal to intervene. Elias walked directly to my side, offering me a brief, deeply respectful nod before turning his piercing, predatory gaze onto Derrick's sleazy lawyer. Vance's smug expression instantly evaporated. He clearly recognized Elias, a man who regularly destroyed multi-billion-dollar corporations in federal court before his morning coffee. "May I see that document, counselor?" Elias requested, holding out his hand. It was not a request. It was an absolute terrifying demand. Vance hesitated, his bravado rapidly draining away under Elias's intense microscopic scrutiny. He reluctantly handed the stack of papers over his hand, trembling slightly. Elias didn't even need to read the entire page. He simply flipped to the final signature block, pulled a pair of silver reading glasses from his breast pocket, and examined the notary stamp and the printed text. He tapped the paper with his index finger, looking at Vance with an expression of pure, unadulterated legal disgust. "This is a remarkably bold attempt at extortion, Mr. Vance." Elias stated, his voice a low, lethal rumble that commanded the absolute attention of every single person on the steps. "However, it is incredibly embarrassingly sloppy. You claim this addendum was signed and notarized by my client 3 years ago. Yet I am looking at a notary seal belonging to a Mr. George Pendleton. I happen to know George personally. He did not receive his state notary commission until 14 months ago." Vance's jaw dropped. He swallowed hard, the color draining from his face. "Furthermore," Elias continued, raising the document up to the television cameras, "the font used on this specific page is Aptos, a proprietary typeface released by Microsoft as a default only last year. You printed a fraudulent document this morning and backdated it to steal millions of dollars from my client." Elias lowered the fraudulent document, letting it dangle loosely from his fingertips, as if it were a piece of contaminated biohazard waste. He stared down at the sweating, pathetic excuse for a lawyer, his piercing gaze radiating absolute, unfiltered contempt. The silence on the courthouse steps was deafening, save for the relentless whir and click of the television cameras capturing every single second of the legal slaughter. "Submitting a fabricated legal document during an active divorce proceeding is a textbook case of perjury, Mr. Vance," Elias explained, his voice projecting with the practiced, booming cadence of a veteran litigator addressing a jury. "However, attempting to claim millions of dollars in corporate equity using that forged addendum, and doing it while broadcasting your intentions on live television, crosses the threshold into federal wire fraud, attempted grand larceny, and criminal conspiracy." Vance's mouth opened and closed like a suffocating fish. The shiny gray suit that he had worn so proudly just moments ago now looked like a sweaty, suffocating prison uniform. He wiped a heavy bead of perspiration from his upper lip, his eyes darting frantically toward the heavy oak doors of the courthouse, desperately searching for an escape route. "You're bluffing?" Vance whispered, his voice trembling so violently that the microphone barely picked it up. "You can't prove I knew it was forged. My client gave it to me." I never bluff, counselor. Elias corrected him sharply, stepping directly into Vance's personal space, towering over the shorter man. And throwing your disgraced client under the bus will not save your license. I have my senior paralegal drafting a formal expedited complaint to the Georgia Bar Association and the United States Attorney's Office as we speak. Because you utilized the United States Postal Service and electronic mail to file the initial motions for this divorce, we are also adding mail fraud to the federal indictment. The stark, terrifying reality of Elias's threat hit Vance like a speeding freight train. He looked at the forged paper in Elias's hand. He looked at the glowing red live light on the Channel 8 news camera aimed squarely at his sweating, guilty face. And then he made an instantaneous, cowardly decision. Vance dropped his battered leather briefcase directly onto the concrete. Without uttering a single word of defense, without offering any apology to the court, and without even glancing at his client, Vance turned on his heel and sprinted in the opposite direction. He shoved his way past a stunned paralegal awkwardly jogging across the plaza toward the distant parking deck, entirely abandoning Derrick to face the legal and financial slaughter alone. "Vance! Vance, where are you going?" Derrick screamed, his voice cracking as he scrambled up from the pavement, his hands reaching out toward the fleeing lawyer. "You can't leave me. Get back here, you work for me. You're fired. I'll sue you." Vance didn't look back. The man literally ran away, his shiny gray suit disappearing into the downtown Atlanta crowd, permanently extinguishing Derrick's absolute last sliver of hope. But before Derrick could even process the profound humiliation of being abandoned by his own legal counsel on live television, a loud, heavy, mechanical grinding sound echoed across the pristine courthouse plaza. The aggressive industrial noise completely drowned out the murmurs of the wealthy spectators. A massive, heavy-duty commercial tow truck, adorned with bright yellow warning lights flashing rhythmically in the afternoon sun, slowly backed into the highly restricted cobblestone VIP parking lot at the base of the stairs. The Channel 8 cameraman immediately swiveled his heavy lens toward the parking lot, instinctively sensing that my orchestrated destruction of this family was not quite finished. The tow truck driver, a burly, bearded man wearing a neon green safety vest and a pair of heavy work gloves, hopped out of his cab. He walked directly past a row of standard luxury sedans and zeroed in on Derrick's most prized, cherished possession. It was a customized midnight black Bentley Continental GT valued at over $200,000. It was the physical manifestation of Derrick's entirely fabricated alpha male CEO persona. The mechanical arms of the tow truck lowered with a heavy metallic clank, sliding seamlessly under the front tires of the immaculate Bentley. Derrick gasped, his eyes wide with fresh, unimaginable horror. He completely forgot about his fleeing lawyer, his ruined company, and his weeping mother. He sprinted down the grand concrete stairs, ignoring the torn fabric of his trousers, and launched himself toward the VIP parking section like a madman. "Hey, what the hell do you think you're doing?" Derrick roared, waving his arms frantically as he charged the burly driver. "Take your filthy hands off my car. Do you have any idea who I am? I will have you arrested for grand theft auto. Unhook my Bentley right this second." The tow truck driver didn't even pause his work. He calmly secured the heavy metal chains around the Bentley's front axle, locking them into place with a loud, satisfying snap. "I don't care who you are, buddy," the driver replied, completely unfazed by Derrick's hysterical screaming, clearly used to dealing with entitled rich people. "I have a legal notarized repossession order right here on my clipboard. This vehicle is getting impounded today. Step back from the rig before you get hurt." Derrick lunged forward, grabbing the driver by the shoulder of his neon vest. "You are making a massive career-ending mistake," Derrick screamed, his face turning a deep, blotchy purple with rage. "That car belongs to me. I am a chief executive officer. I paid for that vehicle with my own hard-earned money. You cannot just take it." "Actually, Derrick, you didn't pay for a single bolt on that car," I said, strolling casually down the remaining stairs to join him in the parking lot. Elias walked right beside me, holding a pristine manila folder. I stopped a few feet away from the tow truck, crossing my arms over my trench coat as I watched Derrick's chest heave with exertion. "You have never paid for anything in your entire miserable life," I explained cheerfully, raising my voice so the news microphones could capture every single word. You leased that customized Bentley under the corporate tax identification number of your health technology startup. You used company funds to finance your personal status symbol because you wanted to look like a billionaire without actually doing the work to become one. Derrick stared at me, his mouth opening and closing as the dreadful realization slowly began to wash over his panicked mind. Since the board of directors just terminated your employment for extreme cause, you no longer possess any legal authorization to utilize corporate assets. I continued, offering him a sweet, merciless smile. And since I am now the majority shareholder and the controlling financial entity of that specific corporation, I personally audited the company ledger this morning. I formally canceled the lease on this vehicle for unauthorized personal use. Elias stepped forward and handed the burly driver the physical repossession authorization. The driver nodded, climbed back into the cab of his truck, and engaged the hydraulics. "The repo order is entirely legal, Derrick," I stated coldly, watching the front wheels of the $200,000 Bentley lift off the pavement. "You don't own a house, you don't own a company, and as of right now, you don't even own a car." The heavy diesel engine of the commercial tow truck roared, spewing a thick cloud of dark exhaust into the humid Atlanta air. The sound was deafening, a mechanical death knell for Derrick's fabricated identity. As the truck pulled out of the VIP loading zone carrying the gleaming midnight black Bentley Continental down the street, Derrick didn't scream anymore. He didn't chase it. He simply collapsed back onto the dusty concrete of the courthouse plaza, pulling his knees to his chest. He looked like a hollowed-out shell, a man completely emptied of the unearned arrogance that had defined his entire existence. A few yards away, the commotion finally roused Evelyn from her stress-induced syncope. The matriarch stirred on the pavement, her eyelids fluttering open. For a brief, merciful second, she looked disoriented, perhaps hoping this had all been a terrible localized nightmare. But the harsh glare of the Channel 8 News LED spotlight, the relentless clicking of the camera shutters, and the sight of her golden child son weeping in the dirt instantly snapped her back to her horrific reality. She pushed herself up onto her hands and knees. Her historic Buckhead mansion was gone. Her elite country club membership had been permanently revoked on live television. Her son-in-law was locked in a federal holding cell, and her supposedly brilliant son had just been exposed as a broke, fraudulent criminal. The empire was ashes. But Evelyn Harrington was a creature forged in the ruthless fires of high society social climbing. As she looked at the shattered remains of her own smartphone lying on the steps, the phone Charles Montgomery had used to excommunicate her, a sudden violent jolt of pure survival instinct electrified her nervous system. She realized there was exactly one card left to play. There was only one person in the entire state of Georgia possessing enough wealth power and vicious legal influence to stop this public slaughter and crush me into the dirt: Uncle Marcus Sr. Marcus Harrington Sr. was the undisputed patriarch of their extended family and the absolute king of Atlanta's African-American elite. He was a ruthless, self-made billionaire real estate mogul who ruled Buckhead with an iron fist. He didn't just have lawyers on retainer. He had an entire army of vicious corporate litigators who regularly destroyed rival companies for sport. He had judges on speed dial and unlimited financial resources at his immediate disposal. To Evelyn, Marcus Sr. was a god. And if someone attacked his bloodline, he was known to rain absolute unmitigated hellfire down upon the offender. Evelyn scrambled across the concrete on her hands and knees, entirely ignoring her torn skirt and the cameras capturing her every pathetic move. She lunged at Derrick, frantically digging her manicured hands into the pockets of his ruined suit jacket. "Give it to me! Give me your phone, Derrick!" Evelyn hissed, her voice raspy and frantic. Derrick was too catatonic to resist. Evelyn yanked his sleek smartphone from his pocket, her trembling fingers violently tapping the screen to unlock it. She navigated to his contacts, her breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps. She found the private, unlisted number for Marcus Sr. and pressed call. Knowing that the local news microphones were hanging on her every word, Evelyn made a calculated, desperate decision. She tapped the speakerphone icon and cranked the volume to its maximum setting. She held the glowing device up in the air like a holy talisman, pointing it directly at me. "You think you've won, Kendra?" Evelyn shrieked, her face contorted with a terrifying mix of desperate hope and venomous hatred. You think you can just orchestrate this massive illegal conspiracy and walk away? You forgot who built this family. You forgot about Marcus. He is going to completely obliterate you for what you've done today. The phone rang out over the plaza. One ring, two rings. The gathered crowd of wealthy spectators, lawyers, and journalists leaned in collectively. Even David Thorne signaled his cameraman to zoom in tight on the smartphone in Evelyn's shaking hand. Everyone in Atlanta's legal and business districts knew the legendary, terrifying reputation of Marcus Sr. If the billionaire patriarch decided to intervene, my hostile takeover could potentially face a massive billion-dollar legal hurdle. I stood perfectly still, crossing my arms over my chest. I exchanged a brief, knowing glance with Elias, who simply adjusted his cuffs and offered a microscopic smirk. We were perfectly prepared for this exact moment. On the third ring, the line clicked open. "Speak," a deep, gravelly voice commanded through the phone's speaker. It was a voice that radiated absolute, terrifying authority, a sound accustomed to immediate obedience. Evelyn let out a loud, theatrical sob, instantly slipping back into the role of the helpless, victimized matriarch. "Marcus! Oh, thank God you answered!" Evelyn wailed, tears streaming down her face as she played perfectly to the rolling television cameras. "It's Evelyn. We are at the Fulton County Courthouse and we are facing an absolute catastrophe. It is a complete family emergency. You have to send your entire legal team down here right this second." The line remained silent, the billionaire listening impassively to her hysteria. "It's Kendra Derrick's psychotic ex-wife," Evelyn screamed, pointing the phone at me. "She has completely lost her mind. She hacked into the corporate accounts and manufactured fake FDA documents to steal Derrick's company. She somehow managed to forge foreclosure papers on my historic estate. She even called in false reports to the APD and had poor Trent arrested on fabricated embezzlement charges." Evelyn paused, gasping for air, her eyes wide and wild. She fully expected the patriarch to explode with rage, to immediately order his lawyers to descend upon the courthouse and rip me to shreds. "You must stop her, Marcus," Evelyn pleaded, her voice echoing over the plaza. "She is trying to humiliate our pristine bloodline on live television. She is trying to steal everything you helped build. I need you to authorize a multi-million-dollar legal defense fund right now. I want her locked in a federal prison for the rest of her pathetic life. Please, Marcus, save our family honor." A heavy, agonizing silence stretched over the sunlit patio for several long seconds. The only sound was the distant hum of city traffic and the aggressive clicking of the news cameras. Everyone waited for the wrath of the billionaire to be unleashed. Then a heavy, exhausted sigh echoed through the small digital speaker. It was not the sound of a man preparing to go to war to defend his blood. It was the sound of a man who was deeply, profoundly disgusted. "I hear you perfectly loud and clear, Evelyn," Marcus Sr. finally replied, his deep voice chillingly calm and entirely devoid of any familial warmth. "And I don't need you to give me a recap of the situation. I have actually been listening to this entire pathetic spectacle unfold on the Channel 8 live broadcast from my office, and I must say the sheer unadulterated entitlement of your lies is truly staggering to witness." Evelyn's triumphant, vengeful smile instantly faltered. Her brow furrowed in deep confusion, her brain completely short-circuiting as the patriarch's words failed to align with her desperate expectations. "Marcus, what are you talking about?" Evelyn stammered, her voice dropping to a nervous, high-pitched whisper. "We are your family. Derrick is your own flesh and blood, your golden nephew. You have to protect us from this crazy woman." "I do not protect criminals, Evelyn," the billionaire patriarch stated firmly, his voice cutting through the speakerphone like a physical blade. "And I certainly do not protect weak, arrogant men who steal from their own companies to fund their gambling addictions and their secret mistresses." Derrick let out a loud, horrifying gasp from the pavement, suddenly realizing that his powerful uncle knew the absolute truth about his catastrophic business failures. "Please, Marcus," Evelyn begged, her hands shaking violently. "You cannot abandon your own blood to the wolves. We need you. Where are you?" "I am not abandoning you, Evelyn," Marcus Sr. replied coldly, the sound of a heavy car engine rumbling in the background of the call. "I am simply arriving to let you face the devastating consequences you have desperately needed for your miserable life. Look toward the street." The call disconnected with a sharp click. Evelyn slowly lowered the phone, turning her head toward the bustling street adjacent to the courthouse steps. The crowd parted, and every camera lens pivoted simultaneously. Sliding smoothly into the loading zone right behind the Channel 8 news van was a massive, pristine midnight black Maybach. The heavy twin-turbo V12 engine of the midnight black Maybach S-Class purred with a low, intimidating growl that seemed to vibrate through the concrete of the courthouse plaza. The massive luxury vehicle glided to a seamless halt right behind the Channel 8 news van, its tinted windows reflecting the flashing strobes of the surrounding cameras. For a moment, nobody moved. The journalists, the affluent spectators, the courthouse security. Everyone held their collective breaths, intuitively recognizing the arrival of true, unadulterated power. The driver's side door opened. A chauffeur in a pristine, tailored uniform stepped out quickly, circling the rear of the elongated vehicle to grasp the chrome handle of the passenger door. He pulled it open, standing at strict attention. Marcus Harrington Sr. stepped out into the humid Atlanta air. He was a tall, imposing figure with a close-cropped crown of silver hair and a meticulously trimmed silver beard. He wore a bespoke charcoal gray three-piece suit that radiated the kind of generational wealth that couldn't be faked, leased, or bought on credit. He leaned his considerable weight onto a polished mahogany walking cane topped with a solid silver lion's head, his sharp, predatory eyes instantly scanning the chaotic wreckage of his own family on the steps before him. He did not look angry. He looked profoundly, devastatingly bored. Despite the brutal reality of the phone call that had just ended seconds ago, Evelyn's fractured, desperate mind violently rejected the truth. Denial was the only shield she had left. She convinced herself that the patriarch had rushed down to the courthouse to personally handle the situation, to throw a protective blanket of billions over their sins, and rescue their family honor from the cameras. "Marcus, you came!" Evelyn shrieked, her voice a grating, hysterical pitch of pure relief. She scrambled up from the dusty pavement. Her designer tweed skirt was torn, her knees were scraped, and her makeup was completely ruined, but she sprinted toward the Maybach with frantic, manic energy. Derrick, seeing his mother move, instantly fed off her delusion. He scrambled to his feet and followed her, wiping the snot and tears from his dirty face. They practically threw themselves at the older man, weeping loudly, their hands reaching out desperately to grab the lapels of his expensive charcoal suit. "Uncle Marcus, you have to help me," Derrick begged, his voice cracking into a high-pitched, pathetic whine. "You have to deploy your legal team. Kendra has completely lost her mind. She orchestrated a hostile takeover. She forged documents to steal my company. You have to destroy her before she ruins the Harrington legacy." Marcus Sr. stopped walking. He planted the silver tip of his cane firmly onto the concrete and looked down at his sister-in-law and his nephew. The expression on his weathered, aristocratic face was not one of familial concern or protective anger. It was a look of pure, unfiltered, absolute disgust. He stared at them, as if he had just discovered something foul stuck to the bottom of his polished Italian leather shoes. "Take your filthy hands off my suit, Derrick," the billionaire patriarch commanded. His voice wasn't loud, but it was a low, lethal rumble that instantly silenced their pathetic weeping. Evelyn and Derrick snatched their hands back as if they had been physically burned by a hot stove. They shrank away, completely terrified by the intense, burning fury radiating from the older man. Marcus Sr. did not offer them a single word of comfort. He didn't ask if they were physically unharmed. He didn't even acknowledge the swarm of reporters capturing the humiliation on live television. He simply turned his back on his own blood relatives and continued walking deliberately across the plaza. The crowd of wealthy onlookers parted immediately, stepping out of the way to give the billionaire a wide berth. The reporters lowered their microphones slightly, sensing that they were about to witness a massive tectonic shift in the power dynamic of Atlanta's elite. Marcus Sr. walked directly past the weeping matriarch, He walked directly past the shattered, hyperventilating former CEO. He walked straight up the concrete stairs, his cane clicking rhythmically against the stone heading directly toward me. I stood perfectly still, my hands resting comfortably in the pockets of my trench coat. I did not cower, I did not step back. As he approached, I offered him a polite, deeply professional smile. To the absolute earth-shattering shock of every single person gathered in that courtyard, the ruthless billionaire patriarch did not yell at me. He did not threaten me with his massive legal team. He didn't summon security to have me arrested. Instead, Marcus Sr. stopped 2 feet away, offered me a warm, highly respectful smile, and extended his right hand. "Excellent work today, Kendra," Marcus Sr. said, his voice carrying clearly over the dead silence of the plaza as he shook my hand firmly. "The execution of this acquisition was absolutely flawless. Your timing with the federal authorities and the board of directors was impeccable." "Thank you, Marcus," I replied warmly, shaking his hand with equal firmness. "I appreciate your guidance throughout the transition process. It took a significant amount of patience to get the final pieces properly aligned, but the liquidation is completely secured." Evelyn let out a loud, strangled gasp that sounded like she was choking on the humid air. She grabbed her chest, staring at us with wide, horrified eyes, her brain entirely incapable of processing the scene unfolding before her. "Marcus, what are you doing?" Evelyn screamed, her voice echoing with sheer, unadulterated panic. "Why are you shaking hands with that treacherous woman? She just stole everything from us. She's a charity case. She's a nobody." The patriarch turned his head slowly, looking over his shoulder at Evelyn with a gaze so cold it could have frozen a raging fire. "She didn't steal anything from you, Evelyn," he stated clearly, ensuring his deep voice projected perfectly for David Thorne's rolling news camera. "Kendra legally acquired a failing, debt-ridden, criminally mismanaged company that your arrogant, incompetent son was driving straight into a federal indictment. And she did it using the vast financial resources that I personally provided." Derrick's jaw dropped completely open. He staggered backward, his hands flying to his head in wild, frantic denial. "You," Derrick gasped, the blood rushing out of his face. "You funded her hostile takeover. You helped my ex-wife destroy my company, but I am your nephew. I am your blood. You're supposed to protect me. You are a massive liability to the family name Derrick." The patriarch corrected him sharply, pointing the silver tip of his cane directly at Derrick's chest. "For 5 years, I sat back and watched you parade around this city, pretending to be a brilliant chief executive officer while you bled my seed money dry. I watched you squander millions of dollars on terrible day trading bets, Miami penthouses, and illegal offshore accounts." Marcus Sr. turned his gaze back to me, his expression softening with genuine professional respect. "But the absolute worst thing you did, Derrick," the billionaire continued, his voice echoing with finality, "was systematically abuse and completely underestimate the most brilliant, incredibly talented young woman to ever enter this family. You all treated her like a peasant because you were blinded by your own sickening elitism. You didn't know that Kendra has been my senior acquisitions consultant for the past 4 years. She is the ruthless architect behind half of my corporate takeovers. She is a predator in the boardroom, and you treated her like a maid." The patriarch looked back at his weeping, destroyed family. "I knew exactly how you treated her behind closed doors," Marcus Sr. said coldly. "I knew about the emotional abuse. I knew about the secret child. I knew about the charity fraud. And I fully, wholeheartedly sanctioned her complete and total destruction of your lives. You handed her the matches, Evelyn. I simply bought her the gasoline." The absolute suffocating silence that followed the billionaire patriarch's declaration hung over the courthouse steps like a toxic cloud. Derrick collapsed back onto the hard concrete, staring at his powerful uncle with hollow, vacant eyes. The final insurmountable pillar of his fabricated reality had just been violently kicked out from under him. Evelyn was still trembling on the ground, completely paralyzed by the realization that her wealthy brother-in-law, the undisputed king of Atlanta real estate, had actively bankrolled her ultimate ruin. But while Derrick and Evelyn were drowning in the sudden catastrophic wake of their destruction, Jasmine was standing near the heavy stone pillars, her mind racing with cold, desperate calculations. She looked at her weeping mother. She looked at her broken brother. She looked down the street where the police cruiser had carried her cheating, embezzling husband to a concrete holding cell. Finally, she looked directly at Uncle Marcus Sr., the only person left on the plaza who still possessed wealth, influence, or power. The stark, terrifying truth hit Jasmine like a physical blow to the chest. There was absolutely zero money left in her immediate family. The gravy train had violently derailed, exploded, and burned to the ground. She was currently strapped to the tracks, and her instinct for self-preservation instantly overrode any lingering sense of familial loyalty. Survival instinct is a deeply ugly thing to witness in real time. Jasmine wiped the thick, running mascara from her cheeks with the back of her sleeve, squared her shoulders, and marched straight toward the center of the patio. She completely ignored her mother, who was desperately reaching out a hand to her. She stepped directly over the legs of her broken brother, without a single downward glance, positioning herself right in front of David Thorne's rolling news camera. And Uncle Marcus Sr. Jasmine clasped her hands together in a pathetic display of desperate theatrical submission. "Uncle Marcus, you have to listen to me!" Jasmine cried out, her voice pitching into a frantic, pleading wail that echoed loudly across the plaza. "You must believe me. I had absolutely nothing to do with any of this. I am completely innocent. They forced me into it. My mother and Derrick forced me to cover for Trent." Evelyn's head snapped up from the pavement so fast her neck cracked audibly in the humid air. Her bloodshot eyes widened in sheer, unadulterated horror as she stared at her only daughter. "Jasmine? What on earth are you doing?" Evelyn shrieked, her raspy voice breaking with sheer panic. "Stop talking to the press right now. Shut your mouth." "No, Mother. I am not going down with your sinking ship," Jasmine screamed back, her face contorting with raw, unfiltered panic. She turned her attention entirely to the rolling television cameras and the eagerly listening investigative reporter. "My husband Trent embezzled hundreds of thousands of dollars from Derrick's company," Jasmine confessed loudly, pointing an accusing finger at her weeping mother. "I found out about it 3 months ago, but I didn't know about the fitness model in Miami. I swear to God I didn't know about the mistress. But Derrick and my mother knew everything. They knew Trent was stealing corporate funds." David Thorne aggressively shoved his microphone toward Jasmine's face, his eyes flashing with the thrill of capturing an explosive live corporate conspiracy confession. "Are you stating on the record, ma'am, that the chief executive officer actively covered up financial crimes?" David demanded. "Yes, yes!" Jasmine yelled, nodding her head frantically for the lens. "Derrick caught Trent stealing the money 6 months ago. But instead of calling the police or reporting it to the board of directors, Derrick used the embezzlement to blackmail Trent. Derrick was terrified that a massive financial scandal would expose his own fake FDA trial data to the federal regulators. So Derrick and my mother forced me to open 3 separate offshore shell accounts under my own name. They made me funnel the stolen money around so the corporate auditors wouldn't flag the missing funds." The crowd of spectators gasped in collective shock. "They told me that if I didn't help them hide Trent's embezzlement, they would cut me out of the family trust and kick me out of the house," Jasmine shrieked, playing to the cameras with exaggerated, pathetic sobs. "I was terrified I was emotionally abused." "You treacherous, lying little snake!" Derrick roared from the ground. The former CEO scrambled up onto his knees, his face turning dark purple, his hands curling into violent fists as he lunged toward his sister. "I never forced you to do anything. You eagerly took your cut of the stolen money. You used it to pay for your luxury shopping sprees in Aspen. You're just as guilty as the rest of us." "I am a victim of emotional manipulation," Jasmine shrieked back, hiding behind a Channel 8 cameraman to avoid her brother's reach. "You and Mother controlled every single aspect of my life. Uncle Marcus, you have to protect me from them. I will testify against Derrick. I will go to the district attorney today. I will tell the federal investigators everything they want to know about his fraudulent business practices. I'll give them the passwords to the shell accounts. Just please, don't let them take my assets. Don't let me go to prison." Uncle Marcus Sr. stared at his niece with an expression of pure, icy contempt. He slowly shifted his weight onto his silver-tipped cane, shaking his head in profound, absolute disgust. You are just as parasitic, greedy, and morally bankrupt as your mother and your brother Jasmine. The patriarch stated, his deep voice radiating absolute authority over the weeping girl. You willingly participated in corporate fraud and money laundering for months, and you only decided to develop a conscience when the money completely ran out. I will not offer you a single dime of legal protection. You can take your pathetic confession directly to the federal prosecutors. Evelyn let out a soul-crushing, agonizing wail of absolute final defeat. The impenetrable elite family unit she had spent 30 years cultivating had completely cannibalized itself in a matter of minutes on live television. Her son was a ruined, jobless fraud. Her son-in-law was in a police cell. And her own daughter had just publicly confessed to corporate conspiracy while gleefully throwing her mother and brother straight to the federal wolves just to save her own skin. They had nothing left to fight with. The family was permanently, utterly destroyed. The complete catastrophic severing of his family ties was the final fatal blow to Derrick's fragile psyche. He remained on his hands and knees on the dusty concrete of the courthouse plaza, his chest heaving with ragged, uneven breaths. The humid Atlanta air seemed to thicken around him, pressing down on his shoulders with the crushing, unbearable weight of absolute reality. He had lost his beautiful, brilliant wife. He had lost his $40 million health technology company. He had lost his historic Buckhead mansion. He had lost his $200,000 customized Bentley. He had lost the respect of his peers, his freedom to walk into the country club, and his meticulously crafted public reputation. And now, in a matter of 5 agonizing minutes, he had lost the powerful backing of his billionaire uncle and had been thrown directly to the federal prosecutors by his own treacherous sister. There was absolutely no one left to blame. There was no one left to manipulate. There was no money left to hide behind. Derrick slowly lifted his head from the pavement. The man who looked up was no longer the arrogant, charismatic CEO of a rising medical startup. The polished, high society golden child was dead and gone. In his place was a cornered feral animal. His custom-tailored suit was torn at the knees and stained with dirt and sweat. His expensive silk tie hung loosely around his neck like a frayed noose. His eyes, usually so full of unearned confidence and superiority, were now bloodshot, wild, and dilated with pure, unadulterated madness. The crowd of wealthy onlookers, lawyers, and journalists intuitively sensed the violent shift in the atmosphere. The murmuring ceased entirely. People began to take nervous, shuffling steps backward, creating a wide, empty circle around Derrick. Even David Thorne's aggressive cameraman took a cautious step back, keeping the heavy lens focused on the broken man while ensuring he was out of striking distance. Derrick's wild, manic gaze swept past his weeping mother on the ground. It swept past his cowering sister hiding behind a stone pillar. It swept past his disgusted Uncle Marcus Sr., his eyes locked entirely exclusively on me. A low, guttural growl erupted from the back of Derrick's throat, a sound devoid of any humanity or reason. He slowly pushed himself up to his feet, his hands curling into tight, violent fists. His knuckles popped audibly in the dead silence of the plaza. "You did this!" Derrick hissed, his voice a ragged, venomous rasp that carried over the concrete. He took a slow, heavy step toward me. "You took everything from me. You stripped me bare. You set me up." I stood perfectly still, my hands resting casually in the pockets of my trench coat. Elias tensed beside me, his protective instincts kicking in, but I held up a single finger to stop the lawyer from intervening. Marcus Sr. remained rooted to his spot, leaning on his silver-tipped cane, watching the scene unfold with cold, detached calculation. He knew exactly what kind of predator I was. He knew I didn't need physical saving. "I didn't set you up, Derrick," I replied, my voice chillingly calm, echoing clearly for the cameras. "I simply turned the lights on and let everyone see the cockroaches scatter." Something inside Derrick completely violently snapped. "I will kill you!" Derrick roared a blood-curdling scream of pure, unfiltered hatred. He lunged. Derrick charged across the 10 feet of open concrete separating us like a rabid dog. He threw his arms out, his fingers hooked into claws, aiming directly for my throat. The crowd screamed in collective terror. Evelyn wailed from the ground, covering her eyes. Jasmine shrieked. But I didn't blink. I didn't take a single step backward. I didn't even flinch. Derrick stopped barely 2 inches from my face. He didn't stop because he suddenly found his conscience. He stopped because the sheer terrifying lack of fear in my eyes paralyzed him. He was a bully, a manipulator who thrived on intimidating the weak. Confronted with a woman who looked at his violent rage with the mild annoyance one might reserve for a buzzing gnat, his physical momentum simply evaporated. He stood there, towering over me, his chest heaving, his spit flying onto the lapels of my coat as he screamed directly into my face. "You think this is over?" Derrick spat, his voice shaking with psychotic rage. "You think you can just walk away and live your happy, wealthy little life while I suffer? I will never let you go. Kendra, do you hear me? Never?" He raised a trembling, violent fist in the air, his eyes wide with madness. "I don't care if I don't have a dime to my name," Derrick screamed, completely unhinged on live television. "I will dedicate every waking second of the rest of my miserable life to hunting you down. I will ruin your firm. I will destroy your reputation. I will drag you through the mud. I will find you, and I will make you pay for what you did to my family if it's the last thing I ever do." I stared up at the pathetic, sweating, violent man standing inches from my face. I looked at his raised fist. I looked at the tears of rage streaming down his cheeks. Then I offered him a slow, merciless smile. "You aren't going to do any of those things, Derrick," I whispered softly, ensuring my voice was low enough that only he could hear the absolute finality in my tone. "Because you are never going to see the outside of a concrete box again." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't break eye contact. I simply raised my right hand and snapped my fingers. A sharp, crisp crack echoed through the humid air. Instantly, the crowd behind Derrick parted in a sudden, urgent wave. From the back of the plaza, seamlessly blending in with the affluent lawyers and spectators, 3 large, broad-shouldered men stepped forward in perfect, terrifying unison. They weren't wearing the standard tailored suits of the courthouse crowd. They were dressed in dark, heavy-duty navy windbreakers, their hands resting firmly on the heavy utility belts strapped around their waists. They moved with a chilling, synchronized tactical precision, their eyes locked directly on the violent, screaming man standing inches from my face. Derrick didn't even have time to turn around before the 3 men silently closed the distance, their presence radiating the absolute crushing authority of the federal government. The physical interception was brutally efficient and breathtakingly fast. Before Derrick could even twitch his raised, violent fist downward to strike me, the largest of the 3 men lunged forward with the terrifying kinetic speed of a striking apex predator. A massive, calloused hand clamped down on Derrick's wrist like an industrial steel vise. Derrick let out a startled, breathless yelp, the manic rage instantly shocked out of his system by the sudden, overwhelming physical force. The man didn't just hold Derrick's arm, he forcefully twisted it backward, utilizing the kinetic momentum of Derrick's own lunge. With a swift, practiced pivot of his hips, the man spun my ex-husband around 180 degrees and violently slammed him face first against the nearest heavy granite pillar of the courthouse steps. The sickening hollow thud of Derrick's cheekbone impacting the solid stone echoed sharply across the sun-baked plaza, instantly silencing all his unhinged screams of pure hatred. Derrick gasped, the wind completely knocked out of his lungs. He struggled weakly, his polished Italian leather shoes scraping desperately against the concrete, but the man had him pinned immovably against the pillar. "Derrick Harrington, remain exactly where you are, and do not attempt to move a single muscle," the man commanded. His voice wasn't just loud, it possessed the booming, undeniable authority of federal law enforcement. Using his free hand, the man reached inside his dark navy windbreaker. He pulled out a worn black leather wallet and flipped it open in one fluid motion, holding it up so Derrick, the rolling television cameras, and the stunned crowd of onlookers could clearly see the gleaming, heavy gold shield pinned inside. "We are special agents with the Federal Bureau of Investigation," the lead agent announced, his voice ringing out with absolute finality. "And you are officially under arrest." The words hung in the humid Atlanta air, heavy and suffocating. Derrick gasped, his face pressed painfully against the rough, hot granite. He twisted his neck as far as the agent's iron grip would allow, his eyes wide with a brand new, entirely different spectrum of absolute panic. "The Federal Bureau of Investigation," Derrick shrieked, his voice cracking into a high-pitched, pathetic whine that was picked up perfectly by the Channel 8 microphones. "This is an absolutely massive mistake. You can't arrest me. I haven't committed any federal crimes. I am a respected corporate executive. This woman is setting me up. She orchestrated this entire hostile takeover to ruin my reputation." The second federal agent stepped forward smoothly from the perimeter, pulling a pair of heavy double-hinged steel handcuffs from the tactical belt at his waist. He grabbed Derrick's left wrist, forcefully pulling it behind his back to meet the right. "You are not a respected executive anymore, Mr. Harrington," the second agent stated coldly, locking the first metal cuff securely around Derrick's wrist with a loud metallic click. "We spent the last 3 hours at the federal field office reviewing the encrypted corporate data files provided by your anonymous angel investor. The unedited, raw clinical trial data you deliberately falsified and submitted to the United States Food and Drug Administration crosses the threshold into severe federal wire fraud, corporate conspiracy, and gross public endangerment." "I didn't alter any clinical data," Derrick wailed desperately, thrashing against the granite pillar, trying to look at his mother, his uncle, anyone who could save him. "My chief medical officer handled the regulatory submissions. You have to arrest her. She falsified the safety reports. I had absolutely no prior knowledge of those specific operational decisions." I took a deliberate, slow step toward the stone pillar, ensuring I was standing directly in Derrick's limited, panicked line of sight. "Don't bother trying to throw your loyal employees under the federal bus, Derrick," I said, my voice cutting cleanly over his frantic lies. "The data dump I handed over to the authorities included every single internal email, every encrypted text message, and the recorded video conferences where you explicitly ordered your medical team to hide the adverse patient reactions. You threatened to fire your lead scientists if they didn't manipulate the cardiovascular testing numbers. The federal prosecutors possess an irrefutable time-stamped digital trail documenting your criminal commands. You are completely out of scapegoats." The third federal agent stepped forward, his expression carved from stone. "Furthermore, Mr. Harrington," the third agent added, his tone devoid of any human sympathy, "we were initially planning to issue a formal summons and allow you to surrender quietly with your legal counsel present on Monday morning. However, thanks to the loud, highly public confession made by your former mistress a few moments ago right here on this plaza, our operational timeline has drastically changed." Derrick froze completely. The fight left his body as he suddenly, horrifyingly remembered the devastating arrival of Destiny and her frantic demands for offshore money. "Your mistress kindly informed the entire city of Atlanta and our active federal monitoring team watching the live news broadcast that you have been actively hiding stolen corporate wealth in illegal offshore shell accounts located in the Cayman Islands to evade the Internal Revenue Service," the lead agent explained, tightening the steel cuffs around Derrick's wrists until the metal bit into his skin. "Because you possess immediate access to untraceable international liquid funds, and because you are now facing several decades in a federal penitentiary for the medical fraud charges, a federal judge has officially deemed you an extreme flight risk. You are being taken into immediate maximum security custody. You will be held without bail until your arraignment hearing." The crushing, suffocating reality of his absolute destruction finally registered in Derrick's arrogant mind. The pristine corporate throne he had occupied for 5 years was entirely gone. His wealth was gone. His luxurious lifestyle was gone. He was no longer the untouchable golden child of Atlanta high society. He was just a pathetic, weeping criminal wearing a torn, bespoke suit, about to be thrown into a federal holding cell. "You have the right to remain silent," the lead agent recited loudly, hauling Derrick forcefully off the stone pillar and spinning him around to face the crowd of wealthy onlookers and blinding camera flashes. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you." Derrick's legs gave out completely. He went entirely limp, forcing the two massive federal agents to physically support his dead weight. They dragged him forcefully across the concrete plaza, toward a pair of unmarked, heavily armored black SUVs that had just silently pulled up to the curb behind Uncle Marcus's Maybach. "Mother," Derrick screamed, tears pouring down his dirty, bruised face as he thrashed helplessly against the agent's iron grip. He sounded exactly like a terrified, helpless toddler. "Mother, please help me. You have to call Uncle Marcus. You have to get me defense lawyers. Don't let them take me away. Please, Mother, save me. Do something." Evelyn slowly lifted her head from the hard pavement. Her expensive designer clothing and makeup were completely ruined. She stared at her screaming son being dragged toward the federal vehicles, but she didn't move a single muscle to help him. She possessed no money, no connections, and no social standing left to offer. She simply lowered her head back down onto the cold concrete and wept in total silence. "Uncle Marcus, please!" Derrick wailed as the agents shoved him toward the open door of the SUV. Marcus Sr. didn't even look in his nephew's direction. The billionaire patriarch simply adjusted his grip on his silver-tipped cane and stared straight ahead, completely erasing Derrick from his reality. The heavy steel doors of the federal transport vehicle slammed shut, trapping Derrick inside and cutting off his pathetic screams forever. The heavy, reinforced steel doors of the unmarked federal transport vehicles slammed shut, echoing with a hollow, absolute finality that seemed to shake the very foundation of the courthouse plaza. The convoy of dark SUVs accelerated seamlessly down the manicured, sun-baked street, carrying Derrick away toward a miserable future entirely defined by concrete walls, razor wire, and an orange jumpsuit. The suffocating, humid Atlanta air suddenly felt incredibly light and breathable. The blinding flashes of the local news cameras finally began to slow down as the exhausted, exhilarated journalists frantically typed up their career-defining breaking news alerts on their smartphones. The absolute spectacular destruction of the city's most pretentious, untouchable family had concluded before the lunch hour was even entirely over. I stood perfectly still on the stone patio, taking a long, deeply satisfying breath as I surveyed the absolute wreckage I had meticulously orchestrated. To my left, Uncle Marcus Sr. gave the concrete a final dismissive tap with his silver-tipped cane. He turned toward me, offering a curt, highly approving nod. "A masterclass in liquidation, Kendra," the billionaire murmured softly, ensuring only I could hear. "I expect to see you at the firm on Monday to review the new acquisition portfolio." "I'll be there at 8 sharp, Marcus," I replied. The patriarch turned and stepped into the plush, climate-controlled interior of his midnight black Maybach. The heavy door clicked shut, and the massive vehicle glided smoothly away from the curb, permanently severing the family's final desperate lifeline to wealth and salvation. A few feet away from where the Maybach had been parked, Jasmine was huddled against the base of a decorative stone pillar. Her expensive silk dress was wrinkled and stained with the dust of the courthouse steps. She hugged her knees tightly to her chest, rocking back and forth in a state of pure, unadulterated shock. She looked absolutely pathetic. Her embezzling husband, Trent, was currently sitting in a holding cell at the county jail, likely begging a public defender for a plea deal. Her arrogant brother was officially in federal custody, facing decades behind bars for medical fraud and public endangerment. The powerful billionaire uncle she had desperately tried to manipulate had driven away without offering her a single shred of sympathy or financial protection. By throwing her family under the bus to save herself, Jasmine had ensured she was completely, utterly alone, permanently stripped of the immense wealth and elitist status she had ruthlessly used to bludgeon other people for her entire adult life. But my ultimate attention belonged entirely to the ruined matriarch, still weeping on the ground. I walked slowly across the brick pavement, the sharp, rhythmic click of my designer heels, forcing the surrounding crowd of lawyers and spectators to completely silence their murmurs. I stopped right in front of Evelyn. The woman who had spent 7 grueling years treating me like an infectious disease was now curled at my feet, clutching her torn tweed jacket, as if it could somehow protect her from the harsh, unforgiving reality of her new, destitute existence. I looked down at her ruined, tear-stained face, feeling an overwhelming surge of pure, magnificent vindication. I didn't feel an ounce of pity. I didn't feel any lingering rage. I simply felt an absolute chilling calmness. "Look at yourself, Evelyn," I commanded. My voice dropped to a smooth, lethal whisper that forced her to open her swollen, bloodshot eyes. Look at exactly what your endless greed and your unbearable arrogance have brought you, I said, my tone echoing with terrifying authority over the quiet courtyard. For 7 years, you demanded absolute perfection and total submission from everyone around you. You built a fragile, fraudulent empire on the broken backs of underprivileged children and the silent suffering of a woman you deemed entirely unworthy of your precious family name. You genuinely believed that your stolen money and your fake social standing made you completely untouchable. But karma is a remarkably patient, highly meticulous accountant. And today, Evelyn, your massive overdue bill finally came due. Evelyn let out a weak, pathetic whimper. She weakly attempted to push herself up into a seated position, but her arms trembled and gave out. She couldn't even look me in the eyes. Her gaze remained locked shamefully on the tips of my pristine, expensive shoes. When I walked out of those heavy oak doors this morning, you and your son went out of your way to block my path, just to hurl one final vicious insult at my face. I continued, making sure my clear words carried perfectly across the plaza, so the lingering news cameras caught the final act. You aggressively mocked my background. You laughed at my supposed poverty. You told me to take my pathetic suitcases and crawl back to the ghetto I dragged myself out of. You were so incredibly confident that I was just a small-minded, helpless victim who would silently fade away into the shadows. I leaned down slightly, forcing her to finally look up and meet my cold, unwavering stare. I want you to remember this exact moment for the rest of your miserable, bankrupt life, Evelyn. I whispered, the venom in my words slicing directly into her soul. I want you to remember that the very ghetto you so desperately mocked and despised is exactly what built my unbreakable resilience. The struggles you laughed at forged a brilliant, ruthless woman who possessed the intelligence and the extreme patience to systematically dismantle your entire fraudulent empire before lunchtime. Evelyn's lower lip quivered. A fresh wave of mascara-stained tears spilled over her cheeks, dripping onto the concrete. You underestimated my worth because you were too arrogant to look past your own elitist prejudice. I concluded, standing back up to my full height. And that fatal, unforgivable miscalculation cost you your house, your company, your country club status, your daughter and your golden child's son. You are nothing now. Absolutely nothing. Evelyn opened her mouth, desperately searching for a single word of defense, a final plea for mercy, or even a pathetic excuse. But her throat was completely dry. She had absolutely nothing left to say, and she had absolutely nothing left to offer the world. She simply lowered her head back down to the pavement in total agonizing defeat. I turned my back on the weeping matriarch and the trembling sister-in-law, completely dismissing their ruined existence from my bright, expansive future. Elias, my brilliant corporate attorney, was waiting patiently at the edge of the courtyard. He offered me a respectful, triumphant smile as he opened the heavy rear door of my waiting, chauffeured black luxury sedan. I stepped smoothly into the plush, quiet interior of the premium vehicle, settling comfortably into the wonderfully soft leather seat. The heavy car door slammed shut instantly, silencing the chaotic noise of the news reporters, the distant sirens, and the pathetic sobbing of the terrible family I had permanently destroyed. As the driver smoothly accelerated away from the Fulton County Courthouse, I looked out the tinted window one last time. I watched the shattered remains of my abusers fade quickly into the distance, fully ready to finally embrace my spectacular new life.